Hey my watchers, welcome. Today we are gonna see, what if Harry was highly brainwashed and manipulated by Voldemort? Join Patreon for early access exclusive content of Super Op stories. Also contents that's too far for YouTube, you will get 400 content there, please do check that too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. Tom stumbled through the forest cursing every deity he didn't believe in. Dumbledore. He blamed Dumbledore. It was his fault as always. Chancing across a clearing, he practically fell in before freezing like the icy shards around him. Tom couldn't believe his eyes. Harry Potter, his mortal enemy, lay before him. He looked so calm and serene with a peaceful look on his face that Tom had never seen on him before. Voldemort had always been obsessed with Potter, the boy who lived to be a pain in his ass. But since fourth year it had been harder to hate him. He was just so similar to the boy, powerful, strong, alone. Harry had grown, handsome over the years. The fierce determination and magic drew to Tom like, well, Voldemort to power. But Harry was happy with that whoring, Weasley and fighting for the so-called light. Besides, he had only been 14. Whilst Voldemort admitted he wasn't the most stable of people, he wouldn't go that far. But now here he was, 16 and lying in the snow in the middle of winter looking stunning and strangely innocent. Dark sweeping lashes framed closed lids. He knew they hid luminescent killing curse-colored orbs, absolutely enrapturing in Tom's opinion. Pale creamy skin lay unblemished, save for his "No Tom's" mark, the scar on his forehead. He looked like perfection with his ebony hair flared against the wintry canvas. White skin striking against the blood-soaked snow. Wait, blood? The cold was biting and unforgiving. It seeped into his skin through the worn cast-offs hanging from his bones. It was as if death himself was reaching out for him. Again. With any luck he would take him soon. Harry knew he was dying. Contrary to popular belief, he wasn't stupid. He just pretended to appease Weasley, rude bastard, and Granger, bossy know-it-all. It may shock many, but Harry hated them. He hated the light, and he really hated Muggles, almost as much as he hated Dumbledore. This would surprise the many people who thought they knew him, but the Harry Potter they knew was a fake. The golden Gryffindor mask. You would wonder why he put up with it for so long. You see, when Harry discovered he was a wizard, it was the best day of his existence. He wasn't a freak, he thought. He was special. He could leave the Dursleys and the abuse behind. But it wasn't to be. It was Dumbledore who had left him with them, without checking on him or caring for the consequences. And the wizarding world was so incredibly biased. He was instantly turned against Slytherins and Voldemort. Sure, Voldemort killed his parents, but it was war. People died. And besides, Harry was never one to care much for family. And the final reason was that the light's precious Dumbledore was the champion for Muggles. Harry hated Muggles. And Dumbledore, did he mention that? They were cowardly, pathetic, and cruel. But he put up with all the light's shtick for one reason alone. He needed magic. And because of that, as much as he hated it, he needed the light. As long as he played the perfect little boy who lived, how he hated that title. He could learn any and all magic. No one would suspect their savior of reading and practicing the black magics, by Salazar Slytherin himself, in the Chamber of Secrets as a pastime. And it's not like he could join Voldemort. He'd kill Harry. But it was his life. Until now. This summer. Harry didn't care about his act about joining Voldemort, any of it. He was just so tired. Sirius was dead. And no, he wasn't grieving. In reality, he never knew the crazy child in a man's body. But he went along with what was expected in the hope of getting away from the filthy Muggles. Fucking Dumbledore's meddling stopped that in its tracks. With no Sirius, there was no crazed mass murderer to threaten his relatives with. So here he was. He had apparated away after his second worst beating yet. So there he lay, bleeding out, dying. Again. He cursed Dumbledore and two of the three deities he had grown so close to all those years ago. Fate and fortune were cruel, ladies indeed. With them, Petunia and Minerva, it was little wonder he was gay. Ginny the little witch had been slipping him love potions since the Yule Ball. Not that they had ever worked. His mind cleared for a second and realized the rambling thoughts of his fading mind. Hypothermia and blood loss would do that. Harry just hoped death would be kinder and would come to claim him soon. That was all he wanted now. But of course the two great ladies had to fudge with him for a little longer, only I didn't say fudge. I said FK with what was sure to be his final breath. Fuck Dumbledore was whispered into he night. His eyes fluttered closed. The night sky going black before he knew no more. What in the name of Salazar was going on? He spends 16 long years trying to kill Harry Potter, and someone else does the job. It must have been one of his Death Eaters. They were so going to get the Cruciatus for this. Fuck Dumbledore. Well, that was unexpected. Enough that it broke him out of his homicidal ramblings. Potter? Voldemort called out in smooth sibilant tones, the Dark Lord was so well known for. And feared, don't forget feared. Potter didn't speak again, but his chest rose slightly. He was alive. Barely. Lord, sir. She disappeared. He waited for what felt like hours for Severus to appear. My lord? You summoned me? Snape glanced at the bed and its occupant. His eyes widened minutely, the only reaction he showed before pulling up his occlumency shields. My lord, is that Harry Potter? Tom narrowed his eyes at Snape, reminding his spy that he was a Dark Lord, and did not like to be questioned. Don't think I haven't had my doubts of where you're, swore the oath and began applying potion after potion to heal Harry. That's all I can do, my lord. Tom sighed, gearing himself up for the inevitable rejection and words of hate that would soon ensue. He had to ask him to join, as on the dark he would be a force to be reckoned with. But he knew that precious Potter would never dare. Very well, Severus. You are dismissed. And remember, not a word to anyone. Snape bowed and left. Slowly, Harry's eyes fluttered open, before closing against the invading bright light. With a quick wave of his hand, the heavy black curtains closed, and the shadows crept forward to greet their master. He could see again. With a painful jolt, all his memories returned to him, and he sat up before freezing. Last he remembered he was in some desolate forest in the middle of nowhere, dying so close to his home. Home. I must be dead. Voldemort, who was sitting by the velvet-decked bed, leaned forward and chuckled. Not yet, Harry Potter. The boy who lived, so eager to die. Why is that? Oh, he must have said that aloud. Harry was missing something here, he knew it. He stared blankly at Voldemort. Wait, that's it. Voldemort. With a manly scream, he did not squeal. He leapt out of the bed before landing on the floor with a resounding thump. Ow! He heard Voldemort chuckle, and peered up through his lashes. The dark twat looked different. Less snake face and more mature Tom Riddle. Shaking his head to clear his mind, he ran towards the window tents and ready to fight. His mind had already evaluated his escape routes. He didn't know the layout to wherever he was, and there could be hundreds of Death Eaters just itching to get a hand on him. But he was on the second floor. Setting the curtains on fire would be a distraction to levitate himself to the ground and make a run for the forest. Once he was in the shadows and the earth, he'd be safe. False title. If you say no, there will not be another offer. I will kill you. I couldn't help but feel excited and anxious, though there was no reason for it. The boy would say no. Why did this stuff always happen to him? What did Harry do? He crawls off to die in peace, and the famous Potter luck strikes again, with Voldemort finding him. How did that even happen? He apparated to somewhere safe. Voldemort's lair isn't somewhere safe. It made no sense. Although the whole peace offering thing was confusing. Was Voldemort really offering him a place on the dark side? Why should I, Voldemort? What is in it for you? I'll never be some sycophantic Death Eater. And why would you want a figure of the light to fight for the dark? For all I know, this is some sick, torturous trick of yours. Potter made some fair points. He was a Dark Lord for a reason after all. Harry stared. Honestly, at this point, it's all he could do. Could he do this? I mean, realistically, he had no reason not to. In the light, he had very few true friends, and even then there was a lot they didn't know about him. That no one did. Here in the dark he belonged. He would have helped getting lay back on Dumbledore. He could be respected and revered. That wasn't the issue. There was just one problem. He couldn't trust Tom. Voldemort? Absolutely not. If he was going to do this, he'd need reassurance. But how the hell does one ask a Dark Lord not to kill, torture, or seriously maim you? Oh Merlin, it's happening. He was actually doing this. The little voice in his head. On one condition. Tom stared. At this point, that was all he could do. When he brought Potter here, he assumed they'd have a duel of epic proportions to the death, where he could finally get over his little obsession and get on to ruling the world. But of course the golden boy, well, he couldn't very well call him that now, had to surprise him. Did Potter really just agree? Oh no, he's staring. Come on Tom, you're a Dark Lord, act like it. On one condition. Well, that makes more sense. Very well, Harry Potter, name your price. Save Mr. Tall, Dark, and Scary the trouble. Seriously. Should have taken the whole painfully dying option. However, Riddle seemed to be considering. I mean, really, could this be any easier? Harry had just ensured his victory. Now his only downfall couldn't harm him. The world would be his for the taking. Victory was so close he could smell it. Deal. With that, a powerful emerald, crimson and black swirl rose around them. Sparks of silver and fuchsia exploded in every direction before stopping. After a brief burning sensation on his wrist, Tom knew that the oath had taken hold. However, from looking down at where there should have been only light scars from the unbreakable vow, there was a shadowy black dragon and snake intertwined. What was that? Harry stared, comforted by the swirl of ominous colors. He was surprised they had gotten involved, but he shouldn't have been. People were always meddling in his business. Obviously the green was his magic. The red was Voldemort's, but the black, silver and fuchsia, death, fate and fortune. It took a second for Harry to respond to the man's question. He couldn't tell. Could he? Deciding against answering, he just shrugged and stared at his wrist in fascination. One thought reverberated through his thoughts. What now? Happens, right? Me too, 'cause I have no idea. Well, this wasn't how I saw my morning going. It's so typical of this to happen when Potters are involved. Well then, Potter. Now that's done, I suppose we are on the same side now. I'd like to bring one of my followers in to make sure you've recovered fully from that little scene yesterday. Then I have some questions. Does that sound satisfactory? The boy seemed rather distracted. It was rather adorable. Anyway, time for answers. He finally looked up from our newest physical editions and faced me. Voldemort sure was stubborn, I'll give him that. I honestly had no idea what I was supposed to tell him. Although we are allies now. Honesty is the best policy and all that. First of all, Voldemort, call me Harry. I've never liked being addressed as Potter. Only Snape does that. And yeah, I suppose if we must, that sounds acceptable. After a moment of consideration, he nodded. Very well, Harry, I'll call in Narcissa now. By the way, we're in Malfoy Manor. I nodded and he left. Being in Malfoy Manor should infuriate me and make me want to leave, but honestly I couldn't care less. Malfoy Sr. is a pompous body and Malfoy Jr. is no better. If they mess with me, I'll have no choice but to retaliate. At least that way I'll get some entertainment. As I walked out of the guest room Harry had been sleeping in, I couldn't help but wonder back on his reactions to these series of events. The boy didn't seem particularly worried about where he was. He clearly had no issue with joining the dark. But from what I and my followers had seen, he was perfectly light and brainwashed by Dumbledore. What had changed? That horrific image of Harry dying peak of emotion into his mind. Harry didn't seem to want to talk about it. Why be so reluctant if one of his Death Eaters had attacked? And those strange lights. The boy seemed to know what had happened. Harry Potter was becoming a bigger mystery by the second. Oh well, he would have his answers. Tom didn't like not knowing things. Doing Narcissa Malfoy's point of view. New character. Yay! As I followed my lord through the corridors of my home, I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. I was mainly called as a healer after a large raid, as Severus was the main healer. But there had been no raids that I was made aware of since our lord gained his new appearance. What was going on? We stopped in front of one of the guest wings of the East Wing, which had become our lord's private quarters when he moved in. He turned to face me and began to speak. Now Narcissa, I'm sure you are wondering why I have called you. I have a new ally that is very important to myself and the cause. However, he was quite gravely injured just yesterday. He has since been healed but requires a checkup. I feel he may be more comfortable around you than Severus. Well, this was strange. Can't. I'm in trouble. At this she laughed. I vaguely remember the Malfoy family are quite close to Snape, so it's possible she knows about the kind of trouble I get into. Well now Harry, I'm just going to do a quick medical history scan to check what injuries you sustained and then I can see how they've healed up. Wait, what? No. Damn it, now they're both staring at me. Come on, Potter, Snape voice said. I mean, why do you need to do that? It's just a few things from yesterday and I'm fine now. I don't want to be a bother, Chissa. They're just sort of staring at me now. Damn, there's no way they fell for that. Hell, I barely believe me. She gave a sort of half smile and said, it's no bother, dear. Fuck, the boy is lying, I just know he is. I've seen my fair share of abuse being with Death Eaters, but more than that, I know what Severus went through as a child. Harry is abused. I just know it. But I need proof. Instead of reacting to the poor lie, I instead smile and reassure him it's no issue. Then, before he reacts, I cast the spell.
Historia salutis revelare.
And what I see shocks me. Patient name: Hadrian James Potter D.O.B. Midnight, July 31st, 1980. Injuries: Year 1 healthy, Year 2 malnourished, Year 3 malnourished, Year 4 incidental magic outbursts, malnourished, burns. Year 5 malnourished, burns, concussion. Year 6 malnourished, burns, broken fibula, broken femur, microfractures left ulna, several concussions. Year 7 glamour applied, malnourished, burns, broken arms, dislocated shoulder, fractured spine, fractured skull, broken neck, death. At this I couldn't help but gasp. This couldn't be right. How could he be dead? He was sitting right in front of me. By now my lord was clearly curious and irritated, but I couldn't bring myself to stop reading. It was much the same until the last 2 years. It got worse. How could it get worse? Year 15. Malnourished, lacerations to back. Year 16. Malnourished, burns, broken femur, dislocated knee, dislocated shoulder, lacerations to back, multiple stab wounds, punctured lung. This couldn't be right, but the spell is always correct. It was real. I passed the sheet to my lord, who by now looked rather angry. That was nothing compared to the expression on his face when he began reading the sheet. I turned back to Harry, who by now has lowered his head so his hair covers his face. Harry, sweetheart? It's okay. I'm going to need you to take your shirt off and the glamour. Can you do that for me, please? Oh, Merlin. Oh, Merlin, oh, Merlin, oh, Merlin. Harry felt like he couldn't breathe and the room started to spin. No one could know, no one could see how weak he had been. He chanced looking up and was surprised at the look of outrage on his face. Lady Malfoy asked him to take his shirt off, and at this point he gave in. Taking a deep breath, he lifted his head, a blank, bored expression on his face, before removing his shirt. It took all his willpower not to flinch at Chissa's gasp and Voldemort's growl of anger. Voldemort growled low in his throat. Even he and his Death Eaters wouldn't do such a despicable thing, especially not to a magical child. How dare they? How dare they? Filthy muggles. It was by now clear that Harry had been abused. How? Voldemort asked. Harry shook his head, indicating he didn't understand. How can you sit there so calm? How could you not tell anyone what happened? Your precious Dumbledore wouldn't have allowed his chosen one to endure such treatment. At this the room turned deathly cold. Ice crept along the windows. The curtains were open, yet darkness enveloped them. The lights flickering, shaking at the face of this powerful being's wrath. Voldemort didn't know what he had said to make Harry so angry, but he instantly regretted it. Harry couldn't help it. But those words, Voldemort being so arrogant to assume he did nothing. He was so angry his power began to fill the room, a swirling blackness. You truly think I said nothing? That after all those years of hell, I just sit there and take it? Harry's voice never raised beyond the low whispering tones, but from the look on the other 2 inhabitants in the room, he could have been screaming. It was the look on Voldemort's face that stopped him from killing him where he stood. The concern and slight regret on the face of the cruel and emotionless Dark Lord shocked him out of his homicidal state. Releasing a long, slow breath, he shook his head and sat back down, the light returning to the room and warmth slowly returning to the fresh summer day. Harry let out a long, shuddering breath. I'll start off by saying that I've not been entirely straightforward about who I am. To anyone. I'm not light, never have been. I'm not going to tell you everything. Some memories are just too painful to think about. But you want answers, and if I'm going to be here, be trusted, then you should know more about me than the lies you've been told. At this, Harry stopped and looked up at Voldemort and Narcissa, who surprisingly still had her arm around him. She was nice, he decided. He liked her. And even Voldemort wasn't being so bad. They looked at each other before turning back to him and nodding, telling him to start talking. That they were listening. So he started talking. How my life started was the same as anyone else's. Up until that night in Godric Hollow, I was a normal wizard child. But after you had killed my parents and then disappeared yourself, it changed. My godfather peak of emotion to me first. He was going to take me away, look after me. He was determined, no matter how much he was grieving, to look after me. But then Hagrid, it was in the morning that everything really changed. Petunia, my OH so lovely, and took me inside and instantly dumped me in the cupboard under the stairs. And that's where I lived for 10 years. In the shadows. I was never scared of monsters as a kid, because people always say monsters hide in the shadows. But that was where I lived. They made me the monster. That's what they called me. Freak. Boy. Monster. I didn't know my own name until I was 7. I learnt a lot when I was 7. As he said this, he had remained calm, looking slightly bored, but a sad and mournful look crossed his face at that last sentence. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he carried on, not once looking at their faces. Then it got worse. He'd burn my arms when I burnt their food, smash my head against a wall when the house wasn't clean to my aunt's standards. Then he started with the belt. I stopped crying after that. I refused to give him the satisfaction. This is why I hate Muggles. I hate them, because they are all the same. They can't control what they don't understand. They fear what they can't control. And they hate fear, so they will do anything to destroy it. Things changed when I was 7. I don't want to go into it, but things weren't so bad after that. They mostly left me alone. At least until I was 11. My accidental magic had been quite powerful, so I wasn't all that surprised to discover I was magical. However, my loving family saw it as a rude awakening. And things got worse again. Obviously you think you know all about my school years. But you really don't. In my first year, the Hat wanted me in Slytherin. But I asked for Gryffindor. Not for the reason most people would think. Finally, Harry looked up towards Voldemort. When I found out you killed my parents, I wasn't really that upset. It was war and they chose the losing side, that was on them. I was only mad that I'd been left at the Dursleys because of you. And before you say anything, even that wasn't your fault. When Hagrid took me to get my supplies, I snuck away to Gringotts to discuss my accounts. That's when I discovered that I wasn't to go to the Dursleys. That my parents had specifically asked I be sent anywhere but to them. But Dumbledore had illegally sealed their wills. After this I began to hate Dumbledore. I went to Gryffindor because it was what people expected of me. People would see me as their little savior, and wouldn't be watching with so much suspicion as they would if I'd been in Slytherin. That was the only reason. I had considered joining you in first year, but I didn't hate Dumbledore so much back then, and you seemed insane, so I fought back. Second year was probably my best year at Hogwarts. I discovered the Chamber of Secrets and finally had somewhere to read, learn and practice the dark arts. I decided to hide my full capabilities when I peak of emotion to Hogwarts. I thought it would be easier if everyone underestimated me. I knew something was going wrong when Shannara the Basilisk started disappearing, and then the messages on the wall. I had to stop it because I couldn't let Hogwarts close. I had nowhere else to go. When I spoke to your diary, I realized what it was. A Horcrux. The boy knew about his Horcruxes. He must kill High. Oh right, he couldn't. Voldemort peered suspiciously at Harry, worried more than he showed. What shocked him was that the boy could still tell. "Don't worry, I won't do anything. Actually, you might thank me later when I get to it." Voldemort was confused but still scoffed at the idea of thanking Harry Potter. Surprisingly at this, the boy grinned. Narcissa was surprised by all of this, and worried beyond belief for this poor boy. She wanted answers. But first, "Harry dear, when was the last time you ate? Let's get you some food and a nice hot chocolate before we continue this conversation." Sweet little Harry honestly looked shocked at the offer, before giving a beautiful smile and nodding. Once the house elf delivered the food and they had settled in, her lord gestured for Harry to continue. Harry looked down at the food in front of him, trying to get his thoughts together. Third year, as far as everyone else is concerned, was the easiest year. But that year is when I started to realize that Dumbledore didn't just make a mistake leaving me at the Dursleys. He was supreme mugwump, but Sirius didn't even get a trial. Also, Dumbledore could have me broken and malleable. His perfect little weapon. "Did you know I'm quite good at?" was a prophecy about you and I, Voldemort. And before you ask, no, I don't know what it says. Harry was struggling to hide his laughter at Tom's pout. It was strange seeing the Dark Lord acting so human. Anyway, during the year, Remus Lupin, the Dada professor, was following me, trying to get to know me, apparently. But with his werewolf sense, I knew he'd find out my little secrets straight away. For one, I reek of dark magic. So I spent most of the year hiding that from him. Obviously, you know about fourth year. Apart from your stressful addition, it was fairly uneventful. But fifth year is when things got really bad. Luna as Harry's friends? Comments are always appreciated. Harry closed his eyes to contain his anger, not wanting to lash out at them, the only people who were listening. Obviously, in fifth year you killed Black. But there was more to it than that. When that disgusting toad, Voldemort, didn't know what to think anymore. Potter was dark. Potter was cruel and intelligent and powerful. He inhaled sharply as he looked into those beautiful eyes, swirling with passionate hatred, and knew that together, they could destroy Dumbledore. They could rule the world. And for some reason, Tom didn't mind the idea of sharing it with Harry. Narcissa was quite angry herself at this point. How dare anyone hurt this intelligent, sweet little boy? She swore on the name Malfoy and Black that he would never be hurt again. She was his mother now. And if Lucius or her dragon had a problem with it, they could take it up with her. "Well, dear, we are just going to have to make sure that happens. Don't worry, you're perfectly safe here, and I'm going to make sure you want for nothing. Okay, sweetie?" she said as the touch his tangled black mane. The black madness truly hadn't skipped any of them. Harry stared at Chissa, slightly scared if not a little comforted by her mothering. He turned towards Voldemort with a look in his that pleaded for help. The cruel Dark Lord simply smirked before standing from his armchair and moving to sit on the bed next to him. Tom couldn't help it, but he had always been insatiable in his curiosity. He moved closer to Harry because he wanted to. "Just two more questions before you start smothering the boy, Narcissa." The look she gave him cowed even a Dark Lord. Narcissa was one of the very few Death Eaters that Voldemort truly respected and liked. But she could be scary when she wanted. Harry looked over to him, with that bored, uncaring look on his face again. Voldemort frowned. He didn't like it. For some reason he wanted Harry to smile. "Make that 3. The first one is what happened to you. In the forest. It was right outside of my manor. I was out looking for Nagini." "How did you get there?" Luckily, Nagini had returned the day after Potter was taken to the Malfoys. She was currently waiting for him in the study of the wing Tom had commandeered. Harry had pulled up his icy mask again, because he just knew Voldemort would ask him that. With a cool expression he leaned back against Narcy, comforted by her embrace. "Well, as you know, Bellatrix killed Sirius. Honestly, I didn't really know the man that much, so his death didn't bother me. But I'd been using his status as a mass murderer to keep the Dursleys off my back. Crumbleprat ordered the order to tell my relatives of his death. So they totally unleashed on me, said I was freak, and that this time they'd kill me for good." He saw both of them want to ask about that, about the word that stared up at him from his medical record, death. But they clearly knew not to ask about his 7th year of life, as they kept silent. It was only when he stabbed me that I decided I didn't care anymore. I refused to play along with Dumbledore's games anymore. So I just apparated away to somewhere I could be safe. And I turned up in that forest, waiting to die. I didn't even know where I was. Voldemort didn't understand why Harry's subconscious thought he was safe, although he couldn't help but feel smug at the fact. Harry had come to him. Very well. One more question. Those lights. You recognized them, I know you did. What was that? Immediately Harry shook his head. It's about what happened when I was 7. So no, I'm not going to tell you. This angered the Dark Lord. He demanded to know. So we just aren't supposed to ask any questions about when you were 7? Harry was starting to get hungry again, and was seriously pissed at the stupid dark twat. Exactly. Look, it's complicated, and honestly, I don't trust you enough yet to tell you. Maybe one day, but not today. And before you ask Narcissa, no, I won't take off that glamour now. I'm not hiding any more injuries, so there's no need. Harry instantly felt bad about yelling at her and was sure she could tell. Narcissa wasn't angry at Harry. The poor thing had been through a lot and was clearly starting to break down. So instead of reprimanding him, she smiled. Actually, I was going to ask if you and my lord would like to join us downstairs for breakfast now that conversation is over? You've barely. Harry sighed and allowed Narcissa to walk him out of the guest room. The relief he felt now they knew most of it was surprising. The only thing that worried him now was the frustrated and curious face on Voldemort. That couldn't bode well for him. Tom was going to want answers. His secret probably wouldn't be all that secret for long. Harry shook his head to clear his thoughts, smiling reassuringly at Narcy when she looked at him inquiringly. He didn't have time to focus on that. He had 2 rude and stubborn Malfoys to deal with. At least he didn't have to hide behind his masks anymore. Time to play. Thoughts are the reason why he was shocked when his wife walked in with Potter behind her, completely unharmed. Free. And his lord followed soon after, clearly unsurprised by such actions. How dare that pathetic half-blood brat walk by his lord so casually? What was going on? Potter. Draco couldn't believe his eyes. Potter was here in his house, smiling at his mother. Oh, the pathetic golden boy was not getting away with this. He had to have everything, didn't he? Draco wasn't going to take this attitude from precious Potter as prisoner. He must have been the Dark Lord's prisoner. What else could it be? Harry walked into the dining room, smirking slightly at the shocked and outraged looks on the Malfoy men's faces. Narcissa was clearly having trouble as well, if the quirked half-smile on her face said anything. He looked towards her and smiled. Apparently this was just unacceptable, as Malfoy Jr. suddenly leapt from the table, screaming Sectum Sempra. Instantly a cruel sharp grin spread across Harry's face as he dodged the bright spell and returned fire with a surprisingly dark sanguinum fervor. The blood-boiling curse struck home and Malfoy Jr. fell to the ground screaming in agony. It was his own fault. He shouldn't have expected only light spells from Hadrian. Harry was light, Hadrian wasn't. The stupid little ferret should realize that. Oh, right, the ferret didn't know. His little internal monologue was swiftly interrupted by a bright green spell speeding towards him. Lucius was furious. How dare the Potter brat hurt his heir? He threw the killing curse at the boy, unfortunately forgetting that this was their lord's esteemed guest. A sudden shout of Crucio swiftly reminded him. It hurt like 1,000 stab wounds, and was different from the usual burning alive sensation. His lord must be furious. But when he looked up, it was Potter pointing his wand at him, and he looked terrifying, the same. He looked at her, wary at how she would react to his ungolden boy-like state. However, she didn't seem to even care that her family were currently sitting on the ground, from the shock of pain. She simply reached forward, putting fruit salad and eggs Benedict on his plate. Voldemort walked over to them and took his seat at the head of the table, right next to Harry. As I'm sure you have realized by now, Hadrian is more than capable of looking after himself. I warned you not to attack my guest, and you want against them. I would punish, but I think this humiliation is punishment. Enough. Voldemort then leaned towards Harry and said in a quiet, solemn tone, "Good work." Hadrian looked up surprised, then smirked at the spark of amusement in those crimson orbs. Who'd have thought that the dark twat had a sense of humor? The two Malfoys grumbled and groaned but eventually retook their seats. Draco turned towards his father, indignant and confused. When he mirrored his expression, they both turned to his mother, and were subsequently shocked. She was serving Potter, patting his hair down and just generally fussing. Narcissa Malfoy didn't fuss, not even over her own son. Draco had never been the brightest Lumos, and rarely learnt from his mistakes when angry. "What the hell have you done to my mother, Potter? What's wrong?" The moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen. Hadrian was shocked. He honestly wasn't bothered by anything Malfoy said to him, even if he did hate that word. But clearly it bothered Narcissa. It was strange. When Mrs. Weasley fussed over him, he despised it. But when Narcissa did, he felt warm and happy and safe. Voldemort cleared his throat and went to speak. Instantly everyone turned towards him, alert and listening. Hadrian was in awe of the respect he had from his followers. It reminded him of... Well, there was no point dwelling on that. As you can see, Harry is Hadrian, or Hade. He didn't mean to interrupt, but he wanted to leave Harry Potter behind. Luckily, Valdi didn't look too mad. Hadrian is more than capable of looking after himself. He is our ally now, and you are to treat him as you would me. Do you understand? All of this was accompanied by a ferocious glare that had Malfoy shaking in his seat. Oh yes, this was going to be fun. That up, huh? No? Oh well, I suppose I ought to write some more chapters to make it up for you. Well, here you go. Skeleton digger out. Surprising. Oh yes, Hadrian was going to make things very interesting round here. Malfoy was confused. And he didn't like that, not at all. A Malfoy is intelligent and powerful. And right now Draco, and from looking at his father, Lucius felt like neither. Draco sat and stared at Potter, with no idea what to think. Potter was dark. Potter was cruel. And Potter had just tortured and humiliated two powerful purebloods, whilst allying himself with the Dark Lord and making nice with his mother. What was going on? He still looked like the weedy little Gryffindor, if not slightly skinnier and more battered than usual. What changed? Either way, it didn't matter. Draco would find out and then get rid of Potter for good. It was probably just the precious golden boy thinking he was so much better than everyone else. Their lord would tire of him eventually, surely? In all honesty, Harry was feeling very smug. He had put the Malfoys in their place and it had been so very fun. He probably shouldn't push his luck. Tom, he couldn't think of him as Voldemort after their little torture/bonding session. Wouldn't put up with him all the time, surely. But he couldn't help but egg on Malfoy Sr. just a little. Narcy had practically given her approval. What's wrong, Lord Malfoy? Feeling a little sore? Is that from being defeated by a teenager and a half-blood, or just the Cruciatus? Oh, that glare was just precious. If looks could kill, Hadrian would be dead. Again, he felt like cackling. Oh, Merlin, he was turning into Bellatrix. Lucius was furious with the little brat. His lord may have vouched for him, but he would not tolerate such disrespect. Watch your tongue, Air Potter. As Lord Malfoy, I am your social superior, and as such do deserve some respect, do you understand? At this point he slammed his fist on the table, clearly displaying the Malfoy signer ring. Expecting the boy to be somewhat mollified, he retook his seat, waiting for the apology that was. Eyebrow unimpressed. The Malfoys were a most noble and ancient house. Potter wasn't done yet, it seemed. However, if that was joined by a lordship to a most noble and ancient house such as the Blacks, shall we say, then we would be on equal standing. The Black lordship ring followed the Potter ring. If this was then joined by a noble and most ancient house, then one would be your superior. The Peverell ring appeared soon after. And finally, a most noble and most ancient house would allow me to act however the hell I liked. Let alone three. The Gryffindor, Emrys, and Lufay, Prince. How on Salazar's name? He could no longer use the Emrys name Merlin in front of the boy? Was he in coercion with the Russo/Romanian vampire royal family? Hadrian Potter, Black Romanoff, Dracula, Peverell, Gryffindor, Emrys, Lufay decided not to say anything else. It wasn't needed. He'd played his game. Oh, that was fun. Voldemort didn't know what to say. Even he was shocked. Hadrian was superior even to him as Lord Slytherin. He was the magical heir to Merlin and Morgana, the most powerful wizards of the ages, and related to all those families. Well, he was certainly glad they were allies now. And that smirk on Hades' face. Sin was the only word that could come to mind. Tom quickly looked away, glad his occlumency shields hid any embarrassing expression that may have been on his face. A slight, feminine giggle caught his attention. Narcissa was never one for politics really, or sudden outbursts of emotion. But if her darling Hadrian kept this up, she may just change her mind. She couldn't help it. She giggled. She hasn't giggled since she was 5 years old, and her Aunt Walburga said it was unladylike. And once that started, it was all out. She reached over, attempting to straighten his mop of hair, giggling like a schoolgirl. "Oh, Hadrian darling, I haven't seen a face like that on Lucius since we were in school," and Severus threw a flobberworm in his face. "And how on earth did you become involved with vampires? They can be quite elusive, you know." Hadrian giggled after, and it was the most adorable thing she had ever seen. Snape really did that? Tom couldn't seem to keep his thoughts straight. That one giggle from Hade, he decided, was the most enchanting sound in the entire history of sounds. That smile should be illegal, or locked away so that no one but him could ever see it. Seeing where his insane thoughts were going, he stopped himself and paid attention to the matter at hand. The young Malfoy heir was picking at his food dejectedly, slouching in a rather unbecoming way. His father wasn't much better off. Lucius sat straight-backed in his chair, staring at the ceiling with a look of utter shock on his face. Meanwhile, Narcissa and Hadrian were in a rather hysterical fit of laughter over the childhood antics of Severus and Lucius. Tom couldn't help but notice that Hade had expertly steered the conversation away from the topic of his relation with vampires. He was willing to bet it had all occurred as Hadrian had turned 7. Voldemort was determined to discover what had happened to him. After all, he was a Dark Lord, and this Dark Lord always gets what he wants. Revision. Anyway, yes, we will be finding out a little bit more about our elusive Hadrian, but not a lot because I'm a pain like that, and perhaps define some relationships because why not? Hadrian could feel that the tension in the room was thick. He and Narcissa had finished their conversation to see 2 sullen Malfoy men and a Dark Lord staring at them. Hade wasn't entirely sure what to make of the strange look on Tom's face, and was tempted to peek inside that genius head. However, he was saved from this by a sudden arrival of his 4th least favorite person. Yes, he had a list. Snape. Yes, some things would never change. The last thing Severus expected to see when joining the Malfoy family for breakfast, as he often did when he wasn't busy, was the Dark Lord, and Voldemort couldn't help but be amused. Hadrian really was something. Not only had he managed to shock the Malfoys into silence, but also dramatically confuse his rather stoic spy. It was rare to see any kind of expression on Severus' face. He was worried as well, though. He had heard the legendary hatred between Potter and Snape. He didn't want either hurt, and knew Hade would fight back now. He didn't know who was in more danger. Especially now these strange, possessive emotions for Hadrian had started to appear. All he could hope for is that the battle between the two wouldn't become physical. All this time Hadrian hadn't once taken his eyes off the dour professor. It was amusing how shocked he seemed. Sadistic bastard, probably hoped Tom killed me, he thought to himself. Snape regained himself and flared at Hade. Potter. Hade considered the many ways he could respond, but in the end decided to try and be civil, for Narcy and Tom's sake. If he didn't, this could become a bloodbath. Snape, he said with a curt nod, before dismissing him and turning back to Chissa. Snape wasn't sure how to feel. He was both relieved that Potter was alive as it fulfilled his life debt, but also allowed him to join the dark again. And, Father. He was expecting rage and defiance, but he simply turned away from Narcissa, who looked surprisingly furious, and smirked. Really? Back to insulting James Potter? How unoriginal. Next time do me the favor and think of a more interesting insult that's actually about me. I'm getting bored. How dare that little... Respect your elders, boy. You dare speak to me in such a way? You who hasn't experienced a single hardship in your life. If it wasn't for me, you'd be dead from that Death Eater attack. I don't know why my lord spared you, but... He trailed off as both the Dark Lord and Narcissa Malfoy looked at him in a way that made him want to disappear. If looks could kill, he'd be 6 feet under. As it was, he was at least getting cursed by Narcissa, if not crucioed by his lord. Though he couldn't help but wonder why they suddenly cared so much. Voldemort was furious. How dare Severus speak that way about what was so clearly perfectly his? How dare Snape insult his Haid? If it wasn't for Hadrian likely punishing the dour man himself, he'd be writhing under the crucio right now. As it was, Hadrian seemed rather unconcerned. But Narcissa took the matter out of their hands for them. Lady Narcissa Malfoy née Black was livid. Severus knew nothing of sweet innocent Hadrian or his life, yet he stood there and went to insult him. No, not at all. Severus Tobias Snape. How dare you insult this dear boy, you wretched excuse for a man. He is lord to many ancient and noble houses, as well as heir to not one but 2 royal houses. That alone should gain your respect, if not for the fact that Hadrian wasn't attacked by Death Eaters. Was cruel, horrible muggles that have abused him his entire life. I would have thought you of all people would understand that, yet you willfully blinded yourself to it, for the sake of some petty childish rivalry with a dead man. Haid is nothing like his father, and if you can't understand that, then you and I are going to have some serious problems, do you understand? Hadrian was shocked, to say the least. No one had ever stood up for him, especially not in such a spectacularly terrifying and caring way. The Blacks were definitely all insane, but Narcy was surely becoming his favorite human. That was amazing. He had never seen Snape look so shocked. There was only one small problem, though. Snape and the 2 Malfoy men knew what had happened now. A quick look at said people showed expressions of horror, disgust, and strangely enough, remorse. Tom was still glaring furiously at Snape for some reason. At this point Tom stood and went to crucio Snape most likely. Tom, as much as I appreciate the care, I think Narcissa's tender mercies are more than enough punishment. He drawled in a sarcastic tone with a blank face. He then sent a teasing smile in the sweet witch's direction, to show he wasn't upset at either the insults or her sudden outburst. Tom looked at him for a minute, and Hadrian wasn't sure if he'd listen, but Tom sat back down and addressed the shocked potions professor. I think, Severus, that you understand not to go against Haid. Not only does it seem Narcissa has adopted him, but he is my ally and should be treated with the same respect as myself. Now go, I believe you have much to think on. Well, nothing had made sense today, or any time in his life. Very little surprised Hadrian anymore. Not even the Dark Lord saying his nickname in a strangely soft tone. Snape was surprised, to say the least. However, looking at Lucius and his godson, he felt reassured knowing he wasn't the only one. Potter abused? Really? However, instead of arguing, he nodded and went to return home. His lord was right. He had a lot to think about. Voldemort then dismissed Lucius and his heir, who were both also clearly shocked by this revelation. He had work to do in the study, and made a swift departure, though not before smiling at Hadrian. He was a Dark Lord. He didn't smile. Was this going to be his life now? Potter certainly changed things up. He left the dining room, with murmured words from Narcissa to Hadrian about manor tours and hair control. This was going to be a long day. Shout out to Karma's Enemy and Lunar Eclipse Princess. The comments are always appreciated. Draco Malfoy had no idea what to think. Potter, the golden boy, the light savior. He was abused. And from Uncle Severus assuming it was a Death Eater attack, it must have been bad. Now Draco didn't know a lot about abuse or the raids. He knew his parents sheltered him a lot. But he liked to think he was intelligent enough to understand at least one thing. He didn't really know Harry, or Hadrian as he was going by now. That didn't mean he liked him, but he was willing to start anew if Hadrian was, and he supposed he could share his mother, maybe, previous thoughts on the boy. He was close with Narcissa, and his lord seemed, dare he say, fond of the boy. No matter which way he looked at this, it was beneficial to get on with the child, and he was especially interested in the boy's royal heirship. Little was known of vampires. Severus had never been more emotional in his entire life, except perhaps when he called Lily a mudblood, or the night she died. He was confused, and angry and sad. He felt like had betrayed Lily in protecting her boy. He was angry about being, dare he say, wrong about the boy, and he was confused about many things. How had he not noticed that the Hadrian was abused? Now he thought about it, the signs were obvious. He did things alone, not trusting adults. He didn't ask for help, or reach out to others, either emotionally or physically. Was he really so hateful of Potters that he ignored signs of abuse? Did he really know so little about the Potter brat? He clearly did. As the golden boy he knew would never have sat in a room full of Malfoys and even speak civilly to the Dark Lord. He needed to speak to Hadrian, as he called himself now. He needed answers. Hadrian and Narcissa had separated just a few hours ago, after the grand tour of Malfoy Manor. It was painfully extravagant and big. He only hoped he wouldn't get lost. He was currently reading in the library, quite comfortable in the window seat. That was until Lucius walked in. Instantly tensed and prepared for a fight, he released his wand from its holster hidden on his arm. Malfoy Sr. held up his hands in a placating manner, the universal sign of, "Please don't hurt me." Hade put his wand down, but not back in the dragonhide holster, as Malfoy clearly noticed. The moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen. Hadrian considered Lord Malfoy. He was rude, cold and self-involved, but currently seemed quite repentant. He wasn't fooled, however. Purebloods, and Slytherins especially, were very good at masks. But he supposed it wouldn't cost to hear the man out. He was intrigued on what Malfoy had to say. "First off, I apologize for trying to kill you in your second year. Whilst it had become ingrained in my head that you were the enemy, you were just a child and my actions were unjustified." Here Lucius looked up briefly to see that Hadrian had that rather terrifying blank and bored expression. He hurried along, eager to get this apology over with. "Malfoys didn't apologize. I'd also like to apologize for my disgusting attitude towards you this morning. You were clearly on our side, no longer the enemy, yet I still treated you appallingly despite the fact you are now my guest." Through all of this, Hadrian's expression hadn't changed at all. Lucius wouldn't admit it aloud, but it unnerved him slightly. "Overall, I would like to not only properly welcome you into my home, but also ask for another chance to, perhaps, make a better impression." Hade remained silent for a few minutes, maintaining his blank mask. He was quite proud of the fact he'd managed to make a Malfoy squirm. Finally, he took in a deep breath and said fine before picking up his book and ignoring the blonde. The man sat there confused for a moment before repeating it. "Fine?" Hade chuckled and looked up at Lucius over the book. "You can only be attacked, betrayed, and almost killed so many times before you stop taking it personally. Yes, we can move on. Now, unless there is anything else?" And with that went back to his book. Draco was nervous but told himself he wasn't shaking when he walked into the library. It was perfectly normal to be worried about talking civilly to someone who'd tortured you hours ago. He walked further down the rows of books and stopped short at seeing Potter at the window, reading a book on the dark arts. He cleared his throat, and Hadrian didn't even jump. He clearly knew Draco was there without even looking up. Spooky. Hade began to wonder what was going on. 2 Malfoys in as many hours. If this one apologized, he might just die from shock. He was sure the family motto was "Malfoys are perfect and never apologize," or something similar. After about 5 minutes of Malfoy still not moving, he wandlessly moved a chair forward and returned to his book, gesturing for Draco to sit. Draco assumed that was his cue to take a seat, although how he'd managed it without a wand, command, or even looking up, mystified him. He waited for Hadrian to look up. When he did, albeit with a bored, blank, unnerving expression, he began. "I wanted to apologize for how I've treated you all these years. I realize I barely even know you, yet I've verbally attacked you since you peak of emotion to Hogwarts. And it wasn't even house rivalry. I went too far to use that excuse. The things I said were cruel and uncalled for. To be honest, I was raised with the ideal Malfoys always get what they want. So when you turned down my offer of friendship, I was surprised and hurt. And I took it out on you. And when I saw you this morning, You get along with my mother and well. Malfoys don't share. But I see now that I was childish and petty. I don't know you, but I'd like to. If that's acceptable? Hadrian remained silent throughout Draco's ramblings, and was honestly surprised at how similar Junior was to Senior. He could barely withhold a short at hearing the family motto. But hey, why not shock both Malfoy men? Very well. Malfoy sat there in shock, visibly confused. Clearly, a Malfoy showing remorse was a rare thing. His reaction must have been like seeing a demiguise and saying, "Boring. I accept your apology. To be completely honest, I wish I had taken your hand in the first place. But I knew from when I met you in Madame Malkin's that you'd be in Slytherin. And if I wanted to get through the school year relatively out from under Dumbledore's watchful eye, I couldn't be seen with a Slytherin. I'm willing to get to know Draco Malfoy better now that the golden boy is dead." With that, Hade turned back to his book, ignoring the stunned blonde boy, across both knees. The sight was enough to stop Severus in his tracks. He didn't remember seeing Harry reading a book, ever outside of class. Shaking his head of that ridiculous thought, he stalked over to the boy, believing his presence to be unknown. This was swiftly discarded as a large, wing-backed cushioned chair, Severus' secret favorite, levitate to just in front of Potter, facing the dour man. He blinked before taking his seat. Severus wasn't sure where to start. The boy had already managed to surprise him. He didn't start arguing, didn't ignore him or interrupt. He didn't do anything Gryffindorish at all. He simply waited patiently. That alone solidified the thought in his mind. He did not know this child. So it was time to try and get to know him. "I have questions. If you would be amenable to answer them, then I hope we can come to some sort of truce, for both our sakes. And in turn, I will allow some questions back, although I may not answer all." Hadrian thought of it before deciding that those terms were more than acceptable. He had questions of his own that he was eager to ask, and though the man was a Slytherin, he had required no promise of Hade answering his. "All right, ask your questions, Professor." He then sat back and waited for the onslaught. This was going to take a while, and there we stop. "Yeah, I'm not that nice. I'm going to make you wait for the juicy bits, winky face. More next chapter." People or impose his power of inheritance over them. Lucius had filled him in earlier. His student just tilted his head slightly and stared. Sighing, the boy replied, "I'd have thought that was obvious, Professor. People see what they want to see. You all wanted that precious golden boy that you didn't see the truth. I'm not light. I'm not friends with the Weasleys or the Mudblood. And I'm not some spoilt little prince. You don't know me, so might not want sympathy, but if it would get Snape off his back. I was left with the Dursleys after James and Lily died. You know, Petunia. Well, they despise magic, and by extension, me. They spent years trying to beat the freakishness out of me. After I got my Hogwarts letter, they backed off a little, especially after they found out my godfather was a supposed mass murderer. After he died, Dumbledore thought it would be clever to tell them. Then they realized there was nothing protecting me, and he knew the rest.
I'm sorry.
When Harry only tilted his head, he explained. "Harry, I'm sorry for saying you were spoilt, for expecting you to be just like your father. You just looked so much like him. It hurt. I kept using the excuse you would be safer from both sides if I distanced myself from you. To excuse myself for hurting you. I was a cruel and bitter man. And I'm sorry." Severus had never said the word sorry in his life. Not even to Lily. But it was true. After what his father had done, he couldn't believe Head ignored signs of abuse. He had never been more sorry. Hadrian wasn't sure how to react to that. He doubted the professor had ever been that emotional ever, but he could use this. As much as their arguments were fun, this rivalry would only be detrimental to his plans. And a skilled wizard like Severus Snape on his side could be very useful. "Well, here's my question. If I didn't look like James Potter, would that help?" At the confused look in Snape's onyx eyes, he decided to just show him. "I haven't done this since I was 7 years old," he said with a small half-smile. Taking a deep breath, he took off his glamour. "He looks like that with those eyes. And those symbols are like a dark birthmark on his cheek." Severus was speechless. Harry didn't look anything like Potter. He opened his mouth to say something but no words would come out. Harry smirked and stood, ready to walk out, but turned at the door. By the way, Professor. Harry turned at the door and Snape was not prepared for what he saw. Call me Hadrian. Comments I've got. You've been very good witches and wizards, so I have decided to move forward the relationship between Tom and Harry. And I may not be updating for a little while due to exams. But I will do what I can. Hope you enjoy. Hadrian wondered if he should be worried about what he had just revealed to Severus. But his secret was still just that. A secret. Could drive the potions master crazy for all he cared. If anyone was going to figure it out, it would be Voldemort. Speaking of, he decided to go visit him now. His birthday was in 2 weeks and there were some arrangements that needed to be taken care of. Voldemort had been in the study most of the day, only emerging for lunch, for fear of facing Narcissa and her motherly wrath. Hade hadn't been there much to the worry of those attending. What was strange was that Lucius, little Malfoy and Severus had all seemed rather out of sorts. The second lunch was over. All three had rushed out with barely a, "If I may be excused, my lord." Where was the respect? Sometimes being a scary, powerful Dark Lord was tough. A firm knock at the door brought him from his thoughts. His new obsession. Those viridian green eyes bore into him with a kind of fervor that he knew well. They shone in his own crimson orbs whenever he thought of a raid, or if a plan had gone particularly well. Voldemort seemed preoccupied, but Hade didn't particularly care. He needed to get this over and done with. Because of this, he was surprised when the first thing that peak of emotion out of his mouth was the Malfoys and Severus spoke to me this afternoon. What the hell was this, a casual tete-a-tete with the Dark Lord? Oh well, let's see where this goes. Voldemort couldn't help but be secretly thrilled Hadrian had come to talk to him. But he was also surprised. He rarely had a simple conversation with someone. Orders were given, reports were delivered, and fearful pleas were ignored. Idle gossip wasn't usually his thing. This was why he was so surprised when he responded with, "Is that so?" What did they have to say for themselves? More insults? Even more surprising was the rage he felt at the idea of his followers insulting Hadrian. Actually, they peak of emotion to apologize. Lucius claimed that he misjudged me. I feel it was more for his agenda, but at least I won't have to argue with and shame him all the time anymore. It's fun at first, but eventually just gets tiring, Hade claimed. At Voldemort's smirk and answer he took a seat, seeing, or perhaps hoping, this would last longer. I'm sure you're right. Lucius has had it drilled into his head from a very young age to take advantage of every situation. His father was quite insistent, Voldemort replied. Hadrian went to ask how Voldemort knew Abraxas Malfoy, but Riddle swiftly moved on. And the others? Took Hade a moment to understand what he meant. Before answering, Draco was more sincere than his father. Apparently he wasn't used to being denied or sharing, and his jealousy got the best of him. However, whilst Lord Malfoy seemed despises me because of my father, I thought if he realized how unlike James I really am, things might be easier for him. With this, Hadrian removed his glamour for what would be the final time. Here, Harry Potter no longer existed, and neither did his glamour. Tom didn't know what to say. If Hade was beautiful before, now he was almost ethereal. His pale, almost unhealthy skin had become a smooth alabaster to shame the Malfoys. His black, messy hair now framed his face in soft, perfect curls that he longed to bury his fingers in. And his eyes, clearly not human. Was this part of Hadrian's secret? The reason his medical chart claimed he was dead? The change to his 7-year-old self that introduced him to magic and darkness? This clue only left him with more questions, and he had a feeling they wouldn't be answered. Not yet, at least. Hade couldn't help but smirk and feel smug at Voldemort's smoldering gaze. He couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious of how he looked, considering the first reaction it got. But this was clearly positive, to say the least. Clearing his throat to get Voldemort back on track, he schooled his expression back into a blank mask. Something. This wasn't the answer Tom wanted, but he waved his hand, indicating for Hade to proceed. It's my birthday in 2 weeks, and there are things we must discuss. Tom went to ask what he meant before looking out the window. Darkness had fallen across the well-tended estate. A quick, non-verbal wandless tempest revealed that dinner would soon be served. If you are amenable, we could continue this discussion after dinner. Hadrian quickly nodded, and a worried expression swept over his face. I missed lunch. This was followed by a lowly whispered fuck. Yes. Hade was clearly aware of how Narcissa could be. It was only after the duo left the study did they realize. The entire conversation had been exchanged in the sibilant hiss of Parseltongue. This was going to be interesting, simple. I'll mark it and everything. Read like follow. If we hit 2K, not only will I 100% finish this FIC, but you get to choose the next one I write. Yay! Enjoy dudes and dudettes. Skeleton digger out. Hadrian knew he was in trouble the second they walked into the dining room. The food smelt amazing, the room looked perfect. Harry was dressed in black dragon hide trousers with a forest green dress shirt and casual robe with a snake motif, but Narcissa did not look happy. At all. She stood up, clearly ready to chew him out for missing lunch when her mouth fell open in shock. Oh right, he wasn't wearing his glamour. Narcy wasn't the only Malfoy that looked shocked. Draco clearly had no idea what to think, and there was a glint in Lucius' eyes that were matched in Tom's. So maybe the dragon leather was particularly tight, and maybe his robe was rather form-fitting. Oh well, the only one in the room that wasn't shocked was Snape. Voldemort could see what Hade was doing. Whatever had happened to him clearly left a little emotionally numb to say the least. They would need to fix that. And no, Tom wasn't even going to think about how that wide-eyed, innocent look on Hadrian in those sinful trousers affected him. Nope, not at all. Narcissa stood, all ready to admonish Hadrian on how unhealthy it was for him to miss meals in his state. But the second his new look registered, her mouth fell open in a most undignified manner. Oh, her new adopted son was just gorgeous. Well, he was good-looking before, but now. Oh, and that little face. He looked so adorably and innocent. Every single mothering instinct she had reared up their ugly head. Oh dear, of course. It's fine. As long as you eat now. Quickly serving him a plate, before guiding him to his seat opposite her lord. She couldn't help but ask about his new visage. He shrugged sheepishly before saying he had often had unwanted attention for his looks when he was younger. He'd felt it best to hide it until he was in a safer situation. Narcissa saw she wasn't the only one in the room worried by those words. Exactly how far had that poor excuse for a muggle take the abuse? The medical scan hadn't indicated any dubious undertakings, but then again that didn't always. Best not to think on it.
Hopefully hade.
Would one day feel comfortable enough to tell them the whole story. Snape's mind was racing. What was Hadrian? Why did he look nothing like Lily or James? Sure, his eyes were green, and his hair was black. That's where the resemblance ended. Lily had almond-shaped eyes, and they were a duller green. Potter's hair was uncontrollable and more of a dark brown. And what was he? Vampires were known to be exceedingly beautiful, as were Vela, but vampires had red eyes, and Vela silver. The only creatures he could think of with black eyes were water nymphs and dark elves. But dark elves had pointed ears and were exceedingly tall, whilst water nymphs were in reality annoying and ugly little things. Barely any magical human in them. What was he? Tom was leading Hadrian back to his office. Once dinner was over and Lucius had finished ogling his Hadrian, they had decided to continue their conversation. Taking a seat by the fireplace this time, a hushed Parseltongue resumed. So what is it you wish to speak about? Hadrian took a deep breath. This wasn't really something he wanted to address, but he felt like now would be the best time. It's my birthday in 2 weeks. Usually, on Harry Potter's birthday, he's picked up by the Weasley family and spends some time there before going to Hogwarts. Now we have this alliance. I was wondering how you'd want this to proceed. Tom was silent for a minute, and Hadrian began to worry a little. Voldemort wouldn't send him back to the Dursleys, would he? Tom could see the consternation in Hades' eyes. Whilst another spy would certainly benefit the cause. Especially if it was you, I won't force any decision. You are my ally, not my servant. What would you like to do? The relief was instant. Tom could tell from just this first day he had truly known Hadrian that he didn't show emotion freely. He felt honored that Had showed him, though he couldn't help but wonder as to why that was. Hadrian breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't have to go back. Whilst I understand wanting a spy, the Order and Rumbleroar don't tell me anything. And honestly, I want to punish the Dursleys. Now that I'm not playing the golden boy muggle lover, I don't have to just allow what they did to me. I want revenge. If we make it look like a kidnapping, I can kill the Dursleys and say that I just escaped if you want me back in Hogwarts. Besides, I know loads of ways to sneak in without anyone knowing. Voldemort considered it and realized Hadrian was right. Not only was he not absolutely needed in Hogwarts, but from what he could tell, he shouldn't have to go there. Had was intelligent and powerful. He had seen the kind of books he had been reading. To understand even half of them took genius and power. And after everything he had been through at Dumbledore and the Muggles' hands, he deserves revenge. Very well. I'll have my Death Eaters fetch your relatives immediately, though I'm not sure how to get past those wards. This is where Hadrian surprised him. Again, that seemed to happen a lot today. There aren't any wards. At Tom's surprised face he elaborated. There aren't any wards. That's just bullshit Snumblefuck was throwing to make Potter stay like a good little weapon. And even if there were, you could get through. You've had my blood since 4th year. And as your ally you can no longer do me harm. So yeah, it's a non-issue. Tom was stunned to say the least. He could have killed Potter ages ago. Old micidal thoughts began to pop up, and as it did, the tattoo on his wrist burnt a ferocious fire. That would be the unbreakable bond. It was strangely interactive and attuned to his thoughts. It had almost a magic of its own. Yet it was somehow similar to Hadrian's. He looked from the tattoo to Hadrian, eyebrow raised. A little fluffy. There. Happy? Teasing voice. Tom stood up and started to walk towards him. What the hell was happening right now? He looked around the room, ready to run if need be, but intrigued by his ally's sudden playful mood. This was a side to Voldemort he had never seen or imagined. As if sending his thoughts, Tom leaned in, arms trapping him in the chair. Instead of feeling angry or scared, heat started to rise, from his stomach along his chest to his throat. Voldemort had no idea why he was doing this, but the idea of teasing Had, playing with him and seeing that devious mind and delicious sarcasm, was too much to resist. I think you know more about this mark than you're letting on. A faint red flush now adorned Hadrian's cheeks, along his throat before disappearing under his shirt. Tom found himself wondering how far that flush of red went. Well, this isn't where Hadrian saw this going. But Tom was a genius, and this witty, playful bantering was kind of fun. The Gryffindor in him loved the thrill of taunting the big bad Dark Lord. Two could play at this game. And if I did, why would I tell you? The wicked smirk that graced Tom's face at that sent sparks down Hades' spine. Tom opened his mouth to reply when a knock sounded at the door. Damn. Tom straightened up and turned to the door with a curt draw near. Looking back at the armchair, he was furious to see that Hadrian had disappeared. A movement in the corner of his eye caught his attention, but it was nothing, just a shadow. Turning back to the door to see who dared interrupt his conversation with his Had, Wormtail walked in. Perfect. Needless to say, Wormtail's screams could be heard all across the mansion. Original idea, and the first book is getting started. It's called What It Means to Be Human. Only thing is, I need someone's opinion on it. What do you think? Should I preemptively publish 3 chapters to get your thoughts on it? Meanwhile, here's another fan fiction chapter. Enjoy. Voldemort was furious. He was sure Hadrian was avoiding him, and he didn't even know how. He saw him at meals, but that was it. He would be right behind him walking out of the dining room, and the next he'd be gone, leaving Tom alone with the shadows. It was just like when he disappeared in the office, and Tom just couldn't explain it. Hades' birthday was in 2 days. Narcissa was desperate to throw a ball, introducing Hadrian to the pureblood world, but they couldn't do anything if they didn't have the birthday boy. It was infuriating. Voldemort had planned everything perfectly. Tomorrow afternoon, Hadrian, Voldemort, and the Death Eaters would attack Privet Drive, killing all the Muggles and kidnapping the relatives in the process. They'd stew in the dungeon whilst everyone enjoyed Hadrian's birthday ball and Dumbledore panicked about where his golden boy was being kept. Severus would of course spin some tall tale for them. Over the last week, Severus could often be seen talking intensely to Hade. And not arguing, conversing. It was almost strange to see. Severus, Snape was not one for idle chit-chat. Then Tom would give Hadrian his gift and they could all go and torture those awful pathetic muggles. Now he just needed to find Hadrian. Hadrian was furious. He was avoiding Tom and honestly it was horrible. Sure, he was brewing with Severus and Draco a lot. It was definitely amusing to see Sev's many attempts at guessing what he was. The man was constantly asking him to reveal his eyes and teeth and claws, poking and prodding to try and find some new clue. To be frank, it's hilarious. But Tom was quite different from everyone else. They were so similar. They could. Severus Snape was sure he was going insane. He still had no idea what Hadrian was. And he had spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. In fact, he spent most of his days with Hadrian and occasionally Draco now. He'd gotten to know him much better. He was intelligent and witty, powerful and actually good at potions. He was surprised at how easy it was to get along with him. But for now, he would have to put this blooming friendship to the side. He had a job to do. For the greater good. Draco had been very happy these last couple of weeks. He actually got along surprisingly well with Hade. He was smarter than Potter, funnier than Potter, and a hell of a lot less aggravating than Potter. Although, honestly, he was strangely similar to his lord. He didn't hold back from cursing Draco if he was being annoying and childish apparently. They were well on their way to forming a close friendship. But that had to be forgotten for now. He and Uncle Sev had a plan. For the greater good. Hade was confused. He hadn't seen Severus or Draco all day. In fact, he hadn't seen anyone. At lunchtime, he gave up searching and went to the dining room. Even if they were avoiding him for some reason, they wouldn't dare avoid Narcissa. As Hadrian made his was there, he couldn't help but wonder if Severus had somehow realized what he was and they'd all ran. He instantly threw that small insecure thought aside. It was unlikely, and even if they did, he had other places to go. And he could protect himself from little witches and wizards, even if one was a dark lord. With that confirmation set in his mind, he walked quickly into the room before everything went black. This was completely necessary, Narcissa thought. Hadrian hadn't revealed anything, or fallen into any of her other traps, so jumping on and blindfolding him was the last option. Absolutely necessary for the greater good. Lucius had agreed. Helped even. Oh, she couldn't wait. Voldemort thought this was a little far-fetched to ask Hadrian about his birthday. Practically kidnapping him. But Hade had been avoiding him, so this was a chance to stop that. Besides, his birthday was tomorrow. This was needed. Celebrate his rebirth, so to speak. Then he and the Dark Lord and anyone else wishing to join in would torture their guests in the dungeon. Brilliant. Hadrian woke up that morning, for the first time, excited about his birthday. He had never had a party to speak of, and he could finally be rid of those disgusting muggles. There was only one issue to deal with, then the rest of
Happy birthday, Hade.
Draco couldn't wait for Hade to come downstairs. The birthday boy had slept in, so Draco had to wait before he could dig into the waffles, pancakes, and other assorted goods. He was also looking forward to giving Hadrian his present. He really hoped he liked it, and considering what he knew about Hadrian, he would. Lucius looked around the hall and couldn't help but think his wife had overdone it. Just a little bit. He daren't tell her that, though. It would end in hellfire. As much as he adored his wife, her motherly instincts were a terrifying sight. Narcissa glared at her husband. She knew exactly what he was thinking. However, nothing was too much for Hadrian. He was such a sweet young man, and he'd had nothing before this. If she had it her way, today would be the best day of his life. Voldemort looked eagerly towards the door, hiding his excitement with a cool, composed mask. He truly hoped his efforts would not go unrewarded. He had spent a lot of time thinking about what to get Hadrian. This was perfect, he was sure. Poetic, rather. Hadrian walked into the dining room and for once dropped his masks. Not only had these people done everything for him, but this The entire room was decorated tastefully for the evening's events, with a large poster proclaiming, "Happy Coming of Age Hadrian." The table was laden with delicious pastries and other sweet-toothed wonders, as well as the usual breakfast delicacies. And everyone was there smiling brightly. Well, as much as Malfoys, Snapes, and Dark Lords smiled. It was then that Hadrian's previous nerves dropped. With a large grin, he raced forward and dropped himself into the seat opposite Draco, next to Tom. Everyone was shocked. They had seen Hadrian smirk plenty of times, but as they thought about it, they realized they had never seen the teenager smile. It warmed Narcissa's heart, melted Severus and Lucius' icy souls, and caused Draco to return the expression in turn. And the Dark Lord, that smile should have been illegal. It shined with the light of a million burning stars. He wanted to hide it away and keep it for himself, caused by nothing but him and him alone. Shaking off his, by now frequent, thoughts, Tom greeted the ecstatic teen with a small smile and "Happy birthday, Hadrian." This was followed by a similar chorus, and a tight hug from Narcissa. Once Hadrian was seated, everyone took their breakfast. Tom gazed across the table at Had. Something was clearly on his mind. Voldemort went to ask what was wrong, but was saved from asking by Hadrian himself. Taking a deep breath, Had steeped himself. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. By now I'm sure you've all seen my medical certificate. You know my titles, and I know that Severus at least has become obsessed with unearthing some of my darker secrets. Every birthday since I was 7, I get a visit from the King and Queen of Vampires, Vladimir Dracula and Anastasia Romanoff, my adoptive." Draco listened to the silence for a while, but even as a Slytherin, patience wasn't his forte. "I'm just going to ask what we are all thinking. Does this mean you're going to tell us about your secrets, or do we not get to know at all?" From the massive spike in tension and the cold blank mask Hadrian had yet again adopted, Draco instantly wished he could take back his words. So it was to his great surprise when Had dropped his masks and sighed. "I don't know, Dre. I want to tell you, but a part of me still feels it is something that should never be told. I'm sure you'll learn part of it tonight from Mother and Father, but give me some time, please." Lucius and Severus exchanged glances from across the table, not only at Hades' new openness but also his choice of words. Apparently he only saw them on his birthdays, yet he saw them as parents. And this didn't fit with Hades' clear view of Narcissa as a mother figure. There was clearly more to this than first seen. They could only look forward to tonight and see what happens. After breakfast, Hadrian headed off to call his parents and get ready for the ball, whilst the other manor inhabitants readied the ballroom. Going into his room, he did what he had done once every year for 10 years. Narcissa had noticed he had a lot of jewelry. His necklaces and rings were important to him. The basilisk thong encased in silver, the Hungarian horntail's claw on a leather thong, and the rarest of all, a blood ruby, held by Black Moonstone on a silver chain. One drop of blood on the necklace acted as a summons to his mother and father on Earth. After that he decided to change, whilst waiting for them to arrive. He wore normal trousers with black dragon. Robe was a dark forest green, fading into black, trimmed with a silvery blue, the colors representing the houses he was lord over. The ensemble was pulled together by his lordship rings and the aforementioned necklace. Had stopped for a moment as he looked in the mirror. The last time he had worn this necklace in front of someone, it was his 8th birthday 9 years ago, when his parents had given it to him, his first gift. Shaking his head of his gloomy thoughts, he returned downstairs. Time to party. Narcissa couldn't believe her eyes. All the other guests had already arrived. So she, her husband, and the Dark Lord were the only ones aware of their latest guest, the vampiric king and queen. "Welcome to our home, your majesties. We are honored to meet you. Ever the pure blood." She curtsied. She was starting to see a resemblance to Hadrian. His bone structure was similar to the king's, and his cold mask clearly peak of emotion from the queen. She looked cruel and unfeeling and, "Hadrian, my precious baby," she squealed. Well, perhaps not so unfeeling. The originally composed queen hurled herself at the handsome young man who had reached the bottom of the stairs. Voldemort couldn't believe his eyes. the king and queen of vampires, and they were the parents of his ally. Through a Dark Lord perspective, he couldn't help but feel the war was won. But then he looked at the staircase and all thoughts of war flew from his head. Hadrian was beautiful. He looked majestic and ethereal in the candle light, the blood red in his hair. New character. Yay! Anastasia simply could not contain her excitement. One day a year was not enough time for a mother to see her child. So truly no one could blame her for holding her son close and refusing to let him go. Not at all. Mother, I can't breathe. A great booming laughter had everyone in the entrance hall jumping, as Vladimir looked at his most precious son and heir. My boy, you've grown so much. You're a man now. No one could deny Vlad the tear that fell from his eye. He had missed his child. Father, mother, I'm so glad, you peak of emotion. If anyone saw the glittering in Hades' eye, well, no one said anything. The family held each other close, like nothing else in the world mattered. This was home. Draco had walked in to see the reunion halfway. He couldn't have predicted the anger he saw at the moment. Not at Hade, but at the two vampires that held him so close. He went to yell, but surprisingly was beaten to it by Uncle Severus. If you care so much for him, how could you leave him at that hellhole? Severus began to wish he could take back his words, after seeing the red glint in their eyes. But he held firm. He had to admit he had grown close to Hadrian, and he refused to see him hurt. It's a complicated matter, one that shouldn't be discussed where anyone could hear, the king replied frostily. Lucius began to despair. This was not how he had seen this going. Perhaps we should go to the drawing room. Our guests can wait a little longer to see Hadrian, and perhaps introductions should made. This was addressed to Hade, who nodded gratefully. Once they were seated, everyone looked at Hadrian to start. Hade was not impressed. He had hoped they could at least make it to the ballroom before anything like this happened. Mother, father, I'd like you to meet Lord and Lady Malfoy, Heir Malfoy, Lord Prince Snape, and the Dark Lord Voldemort, my ally. Everyone, this is Anastasia Romanoff and Vladimir Dracula, my parents. Murmured greetings were exchanged, and where I would be without them. At those words his parents leaned forwards and held him for a moment. Those mortals' despicable actions were still fresh in the monarch's minds. The red in their eyes shone again at the thought of tearing those muggles limb from limb. At a pointed cough from the limp-haired human, they realized what everyone in the room was wondering. Well, I suppose to explain our actions you should first know how we met our boy. We'd made a visit to England that year to meet an old friend of ours, Nicholas Flamel, said Anastasia. We were about ready to go home when we picked up a strange scent. Heavy blood, but tinged with another smell. Death, like a vampire, but also not. We began to worry one of our own had been attacked. So we followed the scent to a forest in Surrey. By now tears were flowing freely down her face, and Hadrian was almost in her lap. The deep frown on his face clearly worried all in the room. Seeing his wife lose her composure, Vlad took over. When we saw the state that poor child was in, we assumed he was dead. But to find a child, a 7-year-old, alive after such brutality was astonishing. We don't know how he survived, but we fed him blood to heal his wounds. We were unaware that he was a wizard until it was too late. By consuming our blood, he had become our son. We wanted to take him home, but every time we tried to take him out of Surrey, a powerful magic stopped him from leaving. There was silence for a while as everyone took in the sober revelation. Their precious son took over, as the idea of not seeing him was clearly too much. I later discovered that this was a tracking charm, but at the time I had only just discovered magic. I suggested that they return to their world and visit me on my birthday, hoping one day we would discover how to remove the tracking charm. We never did find a way to remove it. It had worn off on my 11th birthday, when Hagrid took me to Hogwarts. By then I decided to stay at Hogwarts to learn magic. But every time I tried to go home with my mother and father, someone was always there to make sure I got back to the Dursleys. I only ever managed to see them on my birthday. Voldemort felt terrible for all Hade had been through, but a small voice in his head just teased him with the same thing over and over again. But he didn't survive. So how was Hadrian here if he wasn't a vampire? He had already come back by the time the king and queen had found him. How? Narcissa shook of left-over morbid thoughts and stood, smiling. It's time to go downstairs now, Hadrian dear. All pure-blood families and even the minister is here. We've told everyone you are a cousin of mine to explain. The Black Lordship, with a returned smile and nod, everyone went downstairs. The night had gone off without a hitch. He had spoken to pure-blood, families both light, dark and neutral. This party was open to all purebloods and political figures. Tom had said that Hadrian would be introduced to his Death Eaters another time. The minister hadn't even recognized him. There had only been one problem. Dumbledore and certain members of the Order were there. Shacklebolt and Remus, surprisingly. The worry on their faces said everything. They had finally discovered that Potter was missing. When Hade pointed this out to Sev, Luke, Tom and Draco, all four had burst out laughing, thus garnering plenty of evil looks from the light-sided duo. Most likely because Tom had opted out of wearing a glamour. He looked exactly like an older, more mature and sexy version of Tom Riddle. Speaking of, he and Tom had spent almost the entire night together, apart from one point, when strangely enough, Tom had slipped away to speak to his parents. The whole night was almost ruined when the Light Three had walked up to the dark group of five. Tom, my dear boy, I wasn't expecting to see you out in the open now. The ministry has acknowledged your return. And at a birthday party no less. All in the group glared at Dumbledore. Hadrian could see Severus restraining himself from doing the same. Tom then smirked and rested his hand on Hades' shoulder. Hadrian is new to the family and I simply wish to welcome him to the ranks. Hadrian could see, how is you savior? I was hoping to meet him. There. That got rid of the idiot's twinkle. And it was definitely worth it to see the wide grin on Tom's face. Dumbledore looked furious, and instead of answering him, looked towards Tom. I know what you have done, Tom. We will get him back, and when we do, you will lose. With that, the trio left. Besides the unpleasant surprise of Dumbledore, Tom felt the party had gone very well. He had seen Narcissa leave occasionally to put presents in the family living room for afterwards, and spending the night with Hadrian had been a treat. Now he was no longer avoiding him. Their flirtatious teasing and smoldering looks had returned with vigor. The worst part, he would say, was the uncomfortable conversation with Hadrian's parents. Excuse me, your majesties, may I have a word? They nodded and withdrew to a corner of the room. What are your intentions with our son? They hadn't waited for him to speak. I wish to court him, if you would allow me to. They looked at each other for a moment, clearly communicating without words. You are very powerful. A good match for our son. And we've seen how you look at him, you care for him. The vampiric queen stated. The king continued. Do you intend to marry him? He asked. Tom felt rather shocked and uncomfortable at that, but nodded. He wanted Hadrian to be wholly his. Very well. You may court him if he agrees. However, we will warn you now. Before you marry him, we and the Lady Malfoy are not the only ones you need blessing from. This was said in unison and had terrified Tom. Now, however, the party was over and the guests had left. Draco was ecstatic. The ball had been brilliant and Hade was finally going to open all his presents. He had a lot. Hadrian was shocked. Never in his life had he gotten so many gifts. From strangers he got books about his lordships as well as politics and various other subjects, most of which he had already read. What he had really been looking forward to were the gifts from his newfound family. From his mother and father he received an incredible rare albino opal-eyed dragon egg. As opal eyes are white anyway, the black dragons were referred to as albino. From Lucius, he received a very old Malfoy grimoire, dedicated entirely to original dark spells and curses. From Sev he received a rare potions book written in ancient Romanian. It was both a gift and a joke, as he had recently learnt that Hade spoke many languages. What he didn't realize was that, due to his adopted parentage, he was fluent in both ancient Russian and Romanian. From Draco he received a pendant of 2 silver dragons encircling each other. Apparently Draco had one just like it, which acted as a port key. Though the gift he treasured the most was from Narcissa. She wished to adopt him officially into the Malfoy family, with Lucius as his uncle and Draco his cousin. Cracked even the Malfoys' icy hearts, and any tears seen were left unsaid. Finally, he had only the gift from Tom left. He looked towards him and grinned. Tom rolled his eyes, but leant forwards, a box in hand. This is not only a token of alliance, but a sign that I do trust and care for you. Hadrian was touched and wondered what gift could call for such words. Opening the box, Hade gasped at what it held. Slytherin's locket. Tom's Horcrux. Hade went to hide it, but Tom said, "Don't worry, everyone here knows about them. They are my most trusted followers after all." Hadrian was shocked. Tom would trust him with this. "In that case, there is something I have to tell you. Do you remember when I mentioned how I fought with your diary, the first Horcrux?" At his nod, he continued, "Well, I didn't actually destroy it. I used a replicating spell and stabbed that one instead. I just bound your wood back into the diary. I still have it in my room. Tommy and I are actually good friends now." The shocked look on their faces made his night. He considered telling Tom that he was also a Horcrux, but decided against it. He still didn't know how to explain his disappearance in the study, let alone how he knew about his Horcruxes in the first place. Voldemort was shocked to say the least, but considering how long Hade had been playing Dumbledore, he wasn't completely surprised. Mainly relieved his soul was safe. In a way, simply nodding, he was surprised when Hadrian looked out the window and a sorrowful face appeared on him. He'd been smiling all morning. "It's nearly dawn. You'd better go." As the monarch stood, the whole Malfoy family realized what made Hadrian so sad. His parents had to go. "Do not look so sad, my son. You aren't returning to the Dursleys this time. Surely we can still visit you?" And there was that illegal smile again. His sunlight. Yes, he was going to make Hade his. After bidding the monarchs adieu and sending Draco to bed. Confused, the two Malfoys, the Dark Lord, Potions Master, and our fallen hero made their way down to the dungeons. Now was time for the real fun. Hadrian grinned and sauntered forward, his consciousness gone, leaving behind only the dark and cruel mindset of his kind. "Hello, Auntie. Hello, Uncle. And my dearest cousin. We're going to have some fun. If you're really unlucky, I'll even let the others have a turn." From the corner of his eye, he could see the shock on his new family's faces, but couldn't bring himself to care. He knew his eyes were black. His markings had reappeared and his claws were sharp. His teeth lengthened, hungry for blood and pain. A short burst of power threw open the door and Dudley whimpered, "Knew it. You freak. You monster. We should have drowned you as a baby. We should have killed you again when you peak of emotion back." Harry grinned and Dutters pissed himself as his cousin walked out into the candle light. The moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen, themselves as they were written. Freak, monster, demon, slave, abortion, failure. All the cruel and horrible words that they had spewed at him throughout his childhood. The scent of burning flesh was like a drug to Hade. Only when the loud, painful screams ended as hoarse whispers did he stop. A quick spell had the chains slowly pulling his uncle's limbs in every direction. Then he moved on to his cousin, using Imperio to make his aunt watch. A whispered flagranti had Dudley's skin start to peel off layer by layer, until only muscle and quivering flesh was left. The screams were music to his ears, and Hade closed his eyes, swaying slightly to the sound. He was covered in blood and must have looked terrifying, but he didn't care. All that pain, the chaos, it was delicious. A whispered cry took his attention. His aunt. "Ah, yes, Auntie. I almost forgot about you." He leapt at her and used a claw to carve a symbol across the face she had spent hours putting makeup on her whole life. "Now you have a lightning scar just like me." The tinkling innocent laugh that followed shouldn't have come from someone who could cause such blood and pain. "I am so hungry, Auntie, and you've starved me for so long. I think it's only fair you feed me now." And without further thought, he tore her arm off from her shoulder and drank the blood, that peak of emotion pouring from her. He barely heard her screams of please, "No, stop, I'm sorry." When he had finally drank his fill, he sat back and laughed. "Your turn," he told the forgotten audience, before sitting back against the opposite wall to watch. The shock on their face was instantly replaced by anger and cruel amusement. Narcissa threw a few cutting curses before a dark purple corkscrew spell was aimed at Petunia. "What was that?" Hade asked. "It's a spell used for mothers that don't take to their children dear. Now she will feel every emotion of her child." Laughing, Hadrian looked back at the people he had once called family. They were nothing. Lucius and Severus threw all manner of dark curses, removing limbs, inducing nightmarish hallucinations. One spell forced the Dursleys to experience every injury Hade had ever received under their care. It was a lot. Tom finished it. He sent dozens of crucios and went to kill Petunia. "Wait." Everyone in the room was shocked when Hadrian stopped him. "Relatio." Dursley was released from his chains and dropped to the floor with a soft sounds. "Imperio." Slowly he stood and walked toward the quivering mass of flesh that was Dudley Dursley. Slowly but surely he started beating his son to death. When it was over, all that could be heard was heavy breathing and Petunia's tears. Hadrian released the spell and loud sobs reverberated around the room. "You are going to die how I did, uncle." Alone and in pain, Hadrian stood from his crouch next to his uncle, kicking his aunt as he walked back to the ensembled group. "Tom, when you kill them, but their throats and break their spine, please. I promised them they would die how I did." With that, Hade went upstairs for a shower and sleep. There was silence for the longest time before Tom did exactly that. Snap. Violence ends. Keep reading. Later that morning, Tom knocked softly on Hade's door before walking in. "How are you?" He was silent, letting out only a long, suffering sigh. "I'm glad they're gone." Nothing more needed to be said. Tom was silent for a while longer, considering if now was the right time to tell Hade of his intentions. "Hadrian, you know I care for you, more than I think I have for anyone. The last few weeks have shown me a very different you, and I've become enchanted by that person. I want to know more. Everything. And most of all, I want you. Earlier I asked your parents for permission to start courting you. Would you?" Tom could have kicked himself. What kind of question was that? "Would you? Idiot. Fluffy. Fluff. Deal." Hadrian couldn't believe it. Tom wanted him. Tom had seen what he was, and he wanted him. "You really want me after seeing that? Seeing what I am? Surely you have questions or concerns?" Voldemort tilted his head slightly, with a considering look on his face. "I have plenty of question, of course, but I know you aren't ready to tell me yet. I hope one day you will. For now, the only concern I have is if you will say yes." Hade couldn't believe his ears. He turned to look at Tom properly. He stared deep into those hypnotic wine-colored eyes. Beautiful. Slowly he leaned in, hoping this would be answer enough. Their lips met, and honestly, Harry was disappointed that all that rubbish about sparks flying was exactly that. Rubbish. But it was nice. His lips were warm and made his tingle. Slowly, they drew closer and Tom held him to his chest firmly. Their mouths moved together, a dance. A tongue touched his lips, hesitant, and he opened his mouth, letting his Tom in to consume him. There were the sparks. As the two wizards held each other close, wrapped up in silk sheets and tangled limbs, neither noticed a bright swirl of colors and a content-feeling current of magic as they slept. Slowly, Hade opened his eyes to soothing darkness, as per usual. So at first he didn't notice anything different. He must have been truly comfortable to not notice for 5 whole minutes. To not notice the arm that held him tightly to a strong, muscled chest. To not notice the warm, tickling breath on his face. Or finally look up and see the beautiful features of Tom. Here, in front of him, in his bed. Finally, all the events of last night started to come back to him. The party had been fun. He had seen mother and father again, which was great. The Dursleys were dead. At this, a feral grin crossed his features. He had tortured them. Tom had killed them for him. A warm feeling spread from the center of his chest at the thought of last night, when Tom had kissed him and told him he was perfect. He had held him all night and stayed like he'd promised. Tom didn't judge him or fear him, and that had never happened before. Everyone was scared of him eventually. Soon, the warm feeling turned cold and bitter. What would the other think? Would they start to fear him too? Hade, you are thinking much too deeply for so early in the morning. We haven't even eaten breakfast yet. Tom awoke to a soothing dark. He was surprised, but quickly realized he shouldn't be. Not when Hadrian was involved. Hadrian, who was currently clinging to him like he thought he would disappear any second. A frown on his face. Hade, you are thinking much too deeply for so early in the morning. We haven't even eaten breakfast yet. A long sigh and a nod was his answer, before Hadrian looked him in the eye and having him a beautiful, blinding smile. Voldemort surged forwards and quickly captured his lips, releasing them only when they were running out of breath. Dazed, Hade blinked a few times before looking at him. What was that for? He asked. Tom looked deep into Hadrian's eyes, and, for the first time in a long time, smiled. Because I can now, was all he said. And that smile was back. Tom's possessive tendencies reared their head with a vengeance, and as he looked at Hadrian, he knew he would never let anything take him from him. Hade looked up at Tom and smiled, knowing exactly what he was thinking. Your main problem is Dumbledore. Jumping up, he grabbed some clothes and walked into the bathroom. The second he shut the door, all his thoughts about what the others would think peak of emotion flooding back. It was funny how Voldemort could make him forget his worries, when he used to be the cause of them. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he washed his face and changed into his new outfit. Dark red leather trousers and black trainers. Damn, he'd forgotten a shirt. Walking back out, he stopped dead. Tom was standing there in nothing but boxers. Yes, this was a massive improvement to the snake visage. Hade blinked and turned, grabbing a black shirt and putting it on. When he looked around, Tom was dressed and standing at the door. Ready to go? Tom could instantly see the blank mask fall over Hadrian's face, and frowned. He didn't want Hade to hide from him. Don't shut me out. You're worried, what wrong? Hade sighed and peered up at him. Tom just waited. What will the others think of me, after seeing what I am? He trailed of, and Voldemort realized what had worried his Hadrian so. Narcissa sees you as a second son. Draco doesn't even know, and Severus is most likely just going to be intrigued. They will all want answers, but they won't reject you. Both of them ignored the fact that Lucius could very well react badly. Hadrian didn't say anything. He just nodded and walked downstairs. He could do this. I split this into two because it was taking a long time to write. I didn't want you guys to have to wait so long. Lucius is such a mood. He couldn't do this. Hade looked at Voldemort in panic, the stern look on Narcissa's face worrying him. He had only ever seen her look kind and caring. She had supported him for the weeks he had been here, and now she looked mad. His face had actually been blank for the entire journey, but Tom seemed to be able to read him. Maybe he could just see the panic in his eyes. Suddenly a firm but gentle hand guided him to his seat, next to Voldemort. The surprise on everyone's faces amused him, and he could relax slightly. Severus couldn't help but be slightly annoyed at Hadrian. Anytime he did anything, Sev had a million more questions to ask. First, the quite frankly terrifying appearance yesterday, and now he appears to be the Dark Lord's consort. What next? He's secretly a god? Looking around, he was relieved that, at least, no one else had known about this development. Narcissa heaved a large sigh. This was very Hadrian, always keeping them on their toes. But one matter at a time. Hadrian, we need to speak about last night. And before you ask, yes, Draco does know. We felt it was only fair. For a second, utter despair seemed to cross Hades' face before it disappeared. She couldn't even be sure she had seen it. He sighed and slumped in his chair. Narcissa would admit she was panicking a bit. Hadrian had hardly taken his eyes off of the exits, and she didn't want him to leave. But she had to know. They all did. It was time for Hade to stop hiding his secrets from them. Hadrian sighed and reluctantly stopped looking around for a way out. Narcissa seemed to know what he was thinking from her knowing look. He couldn't run or hide forever. He had a story to tell, might as well get it over with. By now you've all seen my medical report. You know I died. That's when it all started, when things changed and I discovered magic. Hade let out a long shuddering breath. He hates talking about this. He hated it. When I was 7, my uncle got fired. He stayed in a pub for 3 days getting drunk. Then he peak of emotion back. Tom looked over the table and saw the worry on everyone's faces. Hadrian was finally looking up, but his eyes were unfocused. He wasn't seeing them, he was somewhere else. Voldemort felt extremely uncomfortable at the sheer amount of worry he had for Had. He'd been whispering, in a cold horror-filled voice. He'd never shown this much pure emotion before. Hadrian felt lost. He wasn't in Malfoy Manor anymore. He was just a little boy in a cupboard, terrified. He walked straight up to my cupboard and dragged me out, threw me into the living room. It was the only time I ever screamed, because I could see it in his eyes. He was going to kill me, and the moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen. The moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen. The shock on their faces was honestly hilarious. It was difficult not to grin. Narcissa was shocked. Her sweet, adorable Hadrian was a demon. He had been brutally murdered. He was adopted by the gods. It did explain a lot, though. Draco had no idea what to think. His friend, who had basically been adopted by his mother, was actually a child of the gods who were real, and he was a demon. Had just couldn't do anything mediocre, could he? It's all or nothing. Damn it. Severus had been so close with the whole nature-creature theory. Yes, he was shocked that Hadrian was a demon and adopted godchild, literally. But he was still Hadrian. Lucius didn't even blink. At this point, he had given up. Had would always have something more to add. Best to just move on and not care. Draco jumped up, desperate to reduce the tense atmosphere. Well, that explains a lot. Who wants waffles? Everyone stared at him before bursting out laughing, and, glad it had worked, he nodded and sat back down. That had worked nicely. Hadrian chuckled and shook his head. People said he was full of surprises, but the Malfoys and co. just continued to surprise him time and time again, always accepting him no matter what. Apparently that's what family does. He grinned and nodded. Hopefully that would be enough tension for the day. Lucius exchanged glances with Severus over the table. It seemed he wasn't the only one to realize what day it was. That any minute that tension would return tenfold. Actually, I believe everyone has forgotten. A sudden hoot, and the beating of wings interrupted him. 2 regular brown male owls landed on the table holding letters. One in front of Draco, and one in front of Hadrian. It was the day students got their Hogwarts letters. Everyone froze, and as he'd thought, the mood dropped considerably. Tom cursed, mentally of course, and glared at the offending parchment. Hadrian and he had migrated to his office to discuss what to do. He had hoped they would have more time together before this peak of emotion up. Hadrian sighed and suddenly said, "I'd rather not go. But it would be better for everyone if I did. I can spy on Dumbledore and the Order, and let your Death Eaters in when the time comes. I was hoping that we could spend more time together. Now we'll barely be able to talk." Voldemort frowned. That wasn't acceptable. Not at all. I'm sure we can find some way. If I still had my diary, I could make a link. Hadrian blinked and wanted to hit himself. How had he forgotten about that? Do you remember when I mentioned I knew about your Horcruxes? Tom just blinked before nodding slightly. Taking a deep breath, he continued. Well, when I died I found out that you turned me into a Horcrux. So when I realized what the diary was, I sort of duplicated it and gave Dumbles the destroyed duplicate. I still have your diary. Tom just stared at him for a while, almost unresponsive. You're a Horcrux? Voldemort couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sure, he was glad that the moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen. Hadrian was breathing heavily as they parted. Not that I'm complaining, but what was that about? He grinned and looked up at Tom through long lashes. You carry my soul. You're mine. His voice growled with possessiveness. If anyone else had done so, he'd have hexed them, but with Voldemort, they were linked by soul and blood and oath. Things always seemed to be different involving them. Hadrian blinked and leant back slightly, from where he was held in Tom's arms. So I'm gonna Hogwarts then? We can talk with the diary. Voldemort nodded and replied, we'll go with your original idea. You were sent out and Death Eaters attacked. You panicked and somehow managed to apparate away, probably by accidental magic. You don't have to tell them where you stayed for safety. I'll pick you up from Hogsmeade at Christmas." With their plans solidified, both went back to their rooms, neither of them looking forward to Harry Potter's return. For the next 2 days, everyone watched Hade alternate between talking with their lord and moping around the house. Narcissa watched in pity and Lucius with amusement. And whilst Severus didn't seem to care, Draco was getting annoyed. Very annoyed. "Merlin, Harry, can you stop for just a second? You'll be coming back, and you will be seeing me and Sev for the whole term. We can meet in his office without anyone noticing. And you'll get to see your actual friends. Lovegood and Longbottom, right? If they are your real friends, they will stick by you. If not, obliviate them. Just get over it." Hadrian just blinked and sighed, before curling up in his lord's lap. Draco gave up after that. "Hey guys, so I have a little favor to ask. Do you think we can get this to hit 3K likes? Maybe? Pretty please? I'm gonna bribe you with this new chapter, with a bruising force." "Rude little cow." "Geez, Hermione, calm down," he said timidly, whilst touch his arm. "Sorry mate, but I agree with her. Bloody hell, do you know how worried we've all been? Dumbledore and the Order have spent over a month looking for you." Hade frowned. Had it really been a month? Time had flown by at the manor. "I'm so sorry guys. Look, can I?" Hade paused for a second and pulled his features into a haunted expression. "For effect. I didn't have a choice. Can I explain it to you when we get to school? It's easier if I only have to do it once. We need to talk to Dumbledore." Ron nodded dumbly and sat down, whilst Ginny looked sympathetic and threw herself into his lap. Hermione huffed and leant back, absently muttering, "Professor Dumbledore." After this, the carriage was silent, everyone evidently lost in their thoughts. Hade restrained himself from just killing them all now. He really didn't think he could do this. He remembered that the twins wouldn't be here. They had left after Umbridge to set up their shop. He would have to wait until Christmas to talk to them. Most people didn't know, but the twins were like his older brothers. In 4th year they had been there for him and defended him against everyone else. They had become close, especially when they realized he could tell them apart. Their own parents couldn't do that, but then again they weren't paid a lot of attention. They were the black sheep of the family. Instead, Hadrian focused on how to get Luna and Neville on his side. Luna should be easy enough. She was a true friend and always seemed to know everything, so it was likely he wouldn't have to explain the summer to her. Neville would be more difficult. The Lestranges had killed his parents, dooming him to a life with his cruel, abusive gran. They were similar in that way. It was likely that Dumbledore was behind that as well, so maybe Nev could be persuaded. If that didn't work, he would just be obliviated. Hade would rather not kill his friend. Hadrian smiled and grinned at the Gryffindor's stupid jokes, and nodded understandingly at everyone who had shunned him when Voldemort peak of emotion back. Inside he wanted to kill them all, screw the Death Eaters and Tom's plan. He could take them and get his revenge on Dumblefuck right now. They were all oblivious and shallow. Just as he was tempted to give into his desires, they draw near the Great Hall. Seeing both Sev and Draco calmed him. Draco looked and winked, before turning back to the Slytherins whilst Severus gave the minutest of nods. He wasn't alone in this. Taking a seat, he was taken surprise as a piece of parchment appeared in front of him, showing the words, "Come to my office. Bring jelly babies." Looking up, he saw the headmaster looking straight at him. He seemed calm, but hard. Finally, it was over and he walked over with C escorted by the Gryffindor trio until they arrived at his office. Showtime. Dumbledore was furious. The holiday had been a disaster. He had worried about his most important pawn disappearing and hadn't been able to get Horace to come to Hogwarts. Instead, he had to bring Lupin in to take the defense position again. There would be complaints, no doubt, but he could use the mutt to keep Harry under control. He had spent all his time and resources in finding the stupid boy, and here he was seemingly safe and sound. He had better have a good excuse, or he may just be tempted to crucio the child. A quick obliviate does wonders. The ward in the door warned him of incoming visitors and before they could knock, called them in. That little trick worked surprisingly well. No one could ever figure out how he did it. Made him seem all-knowing, as he should be seen. After all, he is the great Albus Wulfric Percival Brian Dumbledore. Now, Harry, my boy, would you care to explain where you have been over the summer? All your friends have been very worried about you, especially after Sirius' death and Voldemort's return. A quick guilt trip and emotional blackmail should do the trick. Hadrian sighed inwardly and struggled not to roll his eyes, as if he couldn't feel the ward or see the blatant manipulation. I'm so sorry, Headmaster. I just had no idea what to do. I'd left, and then when I peak of emotion back, it was too late. They were gone, and I panicked. I'm sorry, I just didn't know what to do. By the end, he was sobbing, the tears mainly from suppressed laughter as he watched them fall for it. Hook, line, and sinker. They're my boy. You're safe now. Try again, we need to know what happened. Lemon drop. Hade couldn't hide a scoff, but luckily played it off as a hiccuping sob. The lemon drops were soaked in truth serum, whilst his own were laced with calming draught. Calming drafts were known to be addictive and had bad side effects with prolonged use. No wonder the old man was so barmy. Over the next hour, he spun a web of lies over them all. He sobbed when they mentioned his relative's death and shook as they grilled him for. The moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen. Eventually a relationship with the Dark Lord himself. How was your summer? Of course he didn't say any of this out loud. I didn't want to lead them to any of you. I think it's best I don't tell anyone where I stayed, in case we need it again. It's safe, I promise. He sounded so desperate and eager to please it sickened him. Hadrian froze as the Dumbledore looked him in the eye. He was going to use legilimens on him. Harry Potter wasn't supposed to know occlumency. Where would he have gone? Potter Manor? No, he wasn't supposed to know about his inheritance. As he slowly descended into panic, Ronald ironically saved him. Sir, surely if you couldn't find him, then the Death Eaters can't. Could be a useful hideout? Hade could have kissed the boy if he wasn't a traitorous little blood traitor. Outwardly, Albus nodded safely, but inside he was seething. His pawns were getting too independent these days. He had control, not them. Very well. I'm glad to see you're all right, my boy. Now off to bed. You must be tired. The group of teenagers left and he started to viciously hold in a lemon drop. He would have to get control of Harry Potter somehow. And quickly. As Hadrian lay in bed, he looked out the window wondering what the Malfoys and Voldemort were doing. He sighed wistfully, desperately wanting to try out the diary hidden in his trunk, but not willing to risk it. Not all the boys were asleep yet. Tomorrow. He'd talk to him tomorrow, and meet with Sev and Draco. Maybe talk to Luna. Everything would be fine. He could do this. Choose which one I write. Sound good? Anyway, on with the story. Harry woke up to the deafening roar of Ron's snoring. It was only 4 a.m, but he knew he wouldn't be getting back to sleep. Hade dressed hurriedly before grabbing his cloak and the diary. Tom would be up by now. He made his way over to the astronomy tower. It was still dark, and a non-verbal, wandless tempest showed that no one would be awake for another hour at least. Summoning a never-ending ink quill, he began to write in the diary. Voldemort? Hadrian waited for a few minutes before the ink faded into the page, and new words appeared. Hadrian, I'm glad you've written. When you didn't yesterday, I was worried Dumbledore had discovered what happened. And since when did you still call me Voldemort? Hade sighed in relief when he answered, before feeling slightly guilty for making him worry. It was strange how the Dark Lord could make him feel so much. I'm sorry. Granger and Weasley wouldn't leave me alone. Don't worry, Dumbledore bought it, but he doesn't seem happy that I won't tell him where I was staying. I'm sorry, what should I call you? I know you don't like your real name. The lack of reply worried Hadrian. Was he mad at him? Maybe he shouldn't have mentioned it. It annoyed Hadrian how insecure he was getting. This wasn't him, he wasn't this emotional. He was better than that. I forgot you knew that name. I dislike it as much as you dislike Harry. Perhaps you can come up with another moniker for me. You aren't my Vol? Short for Voldemort but also Marvolo. It's more personal and no one would see it as anything but a nickname. I doubt even Dumbledore would make the connection to your original name. Voldemort didn't respond immediately and Hade could see in his mind how he would be thinking it over. He'd probably be in the study, with his chin resting in his hand whilst he absent-mindedly touched Nagini. That was his thinking pose. Very well. I like it. You will call me Vol from now on. Hadrian chuckled lightly at the command. Vol never really stopped being a Dark Lord. As he went to reply, he heard a creak, and candlelight streamed in as the door opened.
Hade.
Froze and quickly wrote someone's here. We'll talk later, and slammed the book closed. Just as he lifted his wand to stupefy whoever had come in, he recognized the visitor. It was Luna. Her light blonde hair shimmered in candlelight, and she swayed as she glided over to the balcony. Humming lightly, she leaned over the rail, looking out at the grounds. It's a beautiful sunset. The battles aren't around so much today. Today will be a good day. Despite himself, Hade smiled. Luna never changed. He didn't know how, but she always just seemed to know things. Don't you agree, Harry? Oh, sorry, it's Hadrian now, isn't it? Chuckling, he pulled the invisibility cloak off and walked over to the balcony, pulling the small girl into a hug. I've missed you, little moon. Luna smiled serenely and held back tightly. The Ravenclaw was very affectionate, but only really spent time with Neville and Harry, whenever Harry could get away from the ginger and bookworm. I assume I don't really need to tell you about my summer then? Hade asked, even though he knew the answer. Of course not, Hadrian. I support you completely, you should know that, she admonished. He nodded and took her hand, pulling her down to sit. You can call me Hade, you know. Eyebrow, he didn't reply. Lulu knew what she was doing. Whatever you say, clever bird. Both Luna, Neville and Hadrian had come up with a variety of nicknames for each other, as none of them had parents present enough to give them ones, or friends that cared enough. Luna was Lulu, Little Moon, Raven, and the moment turns private as they close the door. The details are left off-screen, because of his scary ability at producing and using poisons. After Ginny had ignored him at the Yule Ball, he'd sneaked a paralytic poison into her drink. The ginger had been stuck in the hospital wing for a week. The scorpion cares for the snake. His sting will protect Snake from harm. Trust is needed for harmony as the sun falls, obscuring the light in. What Luna had first said. You know what, Lulu, you're right. Today is going to be a good day. As they draw near the Great Hall, Lulu sat down at the Ravenclaw table, alone as usual. She watched Hadrian walk over to the Gryffindor table, next to Neville. They spoke in hushed whispers, and she knew they would meet later to discuss the changes over the summer. Luna also knew that sticking with Snake was the right thing to do. He made the basilisk sane again, and would bring change to the magical world. Change for the better. But the bumblebee would do anything to stop him. Neville looked up at her, a confused look on his face, but she just returned it with a dreamy smile before looking up at the beams of the roof for humdingers. They were around a lot this time of the year. Hade smiled at Neville before leaning back over and eating his breakfast. Hopefully this wouldn't be too difficult. Just as he thought that, the two Weasleys with Granger stormed in. Hermione's hair seemed bushier than usual, whilst Ginny and Ron's face matched their hair. Hey guys, what's wrong? The bushy-haired cow looked furious, and as she drew in a deep breath, Hadrian knew today would be difficult one way or another. Maybe Luna was wrong for once? Harry James Potter. What on Merlin's name were you thinking? After this summer, the first night we wake up and, suddenly, he lost his appetite and stood up quickly, touched his head. Just as he predicted, all three of them zoomed in on his scar. Is it Vivival, you know who? Hade shrugged and said, it's probably just a headache. I'm gonna take a walk. I've already eaten anyway. As he walked out of the Great Hall, he loosed a deep breath, relieved to have escaped from the stalkers. Draco instantly stood from his seat and walked out of the Great Hall after Hade. He hadn't eaten, and Mother would kill him if he and Uncle Severus didn't do anything about it. He knew Hadrian knew he was there. Grabbing his friend's hand, he dragged him into a dark passageway behind a tapestry. Hadrian, I know they are annoying, but you can't fall back into old habits. You have to eat. Hade had pulled up his blank mask again, looking incredibly, painfully bored by this entire conversation, just looking at Draco like he didn't care. This worried Draco. Hade had been like this when he'd first arrived, but by the end of summer he'd been much more open with them all. He needed Uncle Sev's help. They would sort this out, or his name wasn't Draconis Lucius Malfoy. All of these were fired off in quick succession, and the panic was clear to see in his eyes. Turning to Hadrian, he looked him up and down, wondering what had happened to distance himself from them yet again. Hadrian, what's wrong? Do I need to call my lord? At that, Hades' eyes started to sparkle brightly. Or perhaps Narcissa would be better. We could inform her how you've ceased to eat here. His eyes widened in panic and he finally spoke. You can't do that. She'd storm Hogwarts herself. Pleased with himself, Severus allowed a small smirk to appear across his face. Hadrian frowned at Severus' blatant baiting, but withheld the eye roll. Fine. I'm sorry. I'm just used to distancing myself from everyone at Hogwarts, except for the meddlesome trio. I have to pretend I like them and it's horrible. I've got a massive headache and I can barely talk to Tom, you guys, or my other friends without one of my stalkers breathing down my neck. By the end of his rant, Hade flopped down into Sev's chair rather gracefully. Severus spoke up. I have received word from my lord. Hadrian found himself leaning forward eagerly, and instantly despised himself for falling so hard for the Dark Lord. Sev continued, he has. Betrayal made it worth it. That, and their appalling company was better than Ginny Weasley's. He'd managed to avoid them between classes as well, calling sick and running to the kitchens for food. Hade knew that Severus really would tell Narcissa. Finally, night fell and Hadrian walked into the room of requirement where Neville was waiting for him. This was going to be a difficult conversation, but he thought back to his conversation with Luna and forged ahead. Time for Snake to get Scorpion on side. Hadrian walked into the room and smiled slightly at what the castle had picked out for he and Neville. It took the basic shape of the Gryffindor common room, with the comfortable chairs surrounding the large fireplace, but had replaced the colors with light greens and soft yellows, reminiscent of the houses they were supposed to be in. The table and fireplace was made of a dark cherry wood. Hade knew that if Luna was here there would be silvers and light blues as well, completing a room that was perfectly them. Nev was already here, sitting comfortably in a large armchair that almost swallowed the now gangly teen. He cleared his throat to alert his friend of his presence. The bright smile he received settled him a little as he took his seat, not on the opposing sofa, but on the table, facing Neville directly. Neville was ecstatic to hear from Harry again. Luna had informed him of Harry's disappearance. Although she had reassured him that this was a good thing, he still couldn't help but worry, especially considering how the Dursleys treated Harry each summer. So when he saw Harry back at school, he instantly agreed to talk to one of the few people who didn't see him as the Cowardly Lion, one of his few friends. Luna, of course, was the other, from his daydream, and he instantly threw a beaming grin to his friend. However, the smile was wiped from his face when Harry sat in front of him, expression solemn. Whatever this conversation was about, it was serious. Snake, what's wrong? Hadrian took a deep breath, shaking his head and burying his face in his hands. It's difficult to explain, and you might just hate me for this. Hade felt Neville take his hands, and he slowly looked up at his friend, confused. Harry, you're my best friend. Nothing could change that. You've made me who I am today, and I'm with you no matter what. Now tell me what's wrong. Hade couldn't help it. His shoulders started shaking, and before he knew it he was laughing out loud. For the first time in a long time. Only Nev, Luna, and the twins had ever made him laugh like that. The only ones that could. You know what, Nev? Sometimes I can really see your Gryffindor coming through. Neville rolled his eyes good-naturedly, but was glad his friend had relaxed at least a bit. He'd known Harry for a long time, when he'd been through a lot, but the dragon had never looked this worried before. About time, he joked. Nudging Harry's arm, he gave him a serious look. He wasn't getting off that easily. Hadrian took a deep breath, noticing that it wavered slightly. He'd never been this nervous before. Neville was one of his few good friends. Suddenly, a silent chill swept through the room, and the shadows stretched towards him despite the blazing flames in the fireplace. Hade felt calm and safe. Death was by his side. I'll give it to you quick and then I'll explain. Basically, this summer I joined the dark. I joined Lord Voldemort. Here he paused to assess Nev's reaction. His expression had frozen on his face, before slowly smoothing into neutrality as he nodded. I mean, I always knew you were slightly dark. and you didn't particularly care for your parents, but I still don't understand why you joined him particularly. You've always fought him and you aren't exactly a great follower of orders. At this, both of them chuckled. It was true that Harry Potter was known for breaking old rules, and incidentally creating new ones. You know about my relatives. It got really bad this summer and I almost died. I apparated to where my magic thought I would be safe and it took me to him. Turns out, he's always wanted me on his side. He found out just how dark I was this summer, and he and the Malfoys took me in. They've really cared for me. Hadrian looked up to see Neville smiling. He must have looked confused because he said, I'm just happy you had somewhere safe to go this summer. That isn't exactly a common occurrence for you.
Hade nog det.
Neville wasn't exactly sure how to respond. After spending so many years as Harry's secret friend and confidant, he wasn't exactly light anymore. He knew all about the Weasley theft, Ginny's potions, and Dumbledore's manipulations. He knew all about the threat of Muggles. And as a pureblood, he was raised to dislike how Dumbledore was pushing out their culture to accommodate Muggleborns. If Harry trusted Voldemort, he would stand with him. But there was one issue: the Lestranges. Harry nodded, and his eyes closed slightly at the reminder of Neville's lifelong pain. That gesture alone always made Neville slightly happier. Harry understood how difficult it was for Neville to talk to his parents every week when they didn't even recognize him. Harry and Luna were the only ones that understood. I'll be honest, I've thought of that. I haven't met them yet, and I hope not to. I want to kill Bellatrix for that alone. Trust me. But she's his most loyal. I don't think he'd be too pleased. In the end, Hadrian spoke to Neville for 3 more hours, only realizing the time when the sun began to rise, its bright beams shining across the room and illuminating their faces. Hade was a little worried his prison guards would notice his disappearance, but decided to focus on his renewed friendship with Nevada. They both stumbled back to the dorms, exhausted but grinning from ear to ear. The 2 boys finally passed out in their beds, and Snape didn't even think about how he hadn't spoken to Vol since his cryptic message yesterday morning. He didn't even consider the worry his sudden absence may have caused. Severus was just about to add the final crucial ingredient to his potion when a hot burning pain in his arm flared up. Dropping the ingredient into the cauldron, he dived under the table to take cover from the resulting explosion, not for the first time cursing his lord for bad timing. He rushed to get his Death Eater robes before flooring Dumbledore to inform him of the sudden summoning, as per his lord's previous instructions. Sev walked to the edge of Hogwarts wards before apparating to Little Hangleton. He arrived expecting to attend a meeting about the upcoming Hogwarts break-in. Therefore, he was surprised to see only Narcissa, Lucius, and Tom in attendance. Well, Wormtail was writhing on the ground under the Cruciatus, but that barely counts. Cautiously, he sidled up to Lucius, asking in a hushed tone what's happened. Lord Voldemort was grimacing and pacing wildly, almost seeming to forget about the Death Eater he was cursing. Lucius chuckled at the sight before replying, I'm not entirely sure, but from what I've gathered our Lord is worried about Hadrian. That would explain the smaller presence. 2 days. It had been almost 2 days since Hadrian had last written in the diary. Anything could have happened. He could have been caught, tortured, brainwashed. Voldemort had never been this worried about anyone or anything. Ever. Lucius and Narcissa claimed that their son hadn't noticed anything strange. He'd decided to torture Wormtail whilst waiting for Severus as stress relief. It hadn't worked though. Every part of his brain had become consumed with worry over his ally, his Horcrux, his Hade. Severus. What has happened to Hadrian? The sibilant hissing tones that his Hadrian seemed to enjoy so very much only served to strike fear within his followers, further reminding him that Hade was gone and possibly in danger. A sharp elbow directed at his lower gut reminded Sev to answer their lord. My lord, Hadrian has appeared well. His work is exemplary and he play the part of Gryffindor Golden Boy very well. His 3 followers seem to be convinced, though Hade has been spending more time with the Longbottom and Lovegood heirs. I believe Hadrian mentioned they were his true friends. Perhaps he has just become preoccupied? The glare his lord responded with quelled his doubts of such things. Instead, he promised to speak to Hadrian the following day, before fleeing back to the relative calm and safety of Hogwarts. Wormtail was not let off so easily. His screams followed Severus through the manor's halls. The next morning, Hadrian woke up rested and pleased with his renewed friendship with Nevada. Even Ronald's snores, Granger's nagging and Ginny's blatant flirting could do nothing to dim his bright mood. This only served to convince them that he was the same old Harry as always. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had forgotten something, and knowing his reputation it would be something big. Only a minute later he was proved correct. Hade was just drawn near the Great Hall for lunch when two pale alabaster hands grabbed his arms, pulling him into the nearest alcove. A muttered somnum ius crucibantur incapacitated whoever had reached for him. The curse acted like the stupefy charm, except with painful and terrifying nightmares. Started by a familiar voice crying out. He summoned a non-verbal Lumos, and was startled to see Draco writhing on the floor. Hadrian hastened to release the spell, immediately apologizing. Draco had no idea what was going on when his uncle Severus demanded he bring Hadrian to his office. Only that it was urgent and to do with their lord. This was the reason Draco didn't stop to rethink his decision to grab Hade. After watching his family die over and over, between being tortured by said loved ones, he understood that a different decision should have been made. Hadrian, what the hell? A sheepish shrug of the shoulders was the only reply he got. Sighing heavily, he dragged Hade all the way back to the dungeons and dumped his scary friend in front of the potions office door. He wouldn't sleep for a week after this. Right next.
Vol?
Are you there? Look, I'm so sorry. Things have been hectic recently. Vol, are you okay?
Vol?
Hadrian began to worry. He'd first written in the diary after dinner, during a lucky reprieve. Ron was playing chess with Dean, and neither Granger or the ginger whore noticed him slip into the boys' dorm. It was now well past midnight, and all the other boys were asleep.
Hello, Hade.
Perhaps now you can understand how worried I was when you leave me such a message and then stay silent for 2 days. If he hadn't already felt so guilty for his faux pas, Hade would have felt a lot worse for that. I'm so sorry. Luna peak of emotion in to talk to me, I panicked. Then I ended up speaking to her and Neville. It's just been a long couple of days. Very well. Do not do it again though, we all began to think the worst over here. Narcissa was threatening to storm Hogwarts herself. They continued to write until the early hours of the morning, as Hade had to sleep before classes the next day. The first Hogsmeade visit was this weekend, and he planned to sneak out to Diagon to speak to his twins. The next few weeks passed much the same, with Hadrian being followed by the Golden Trio, and secret meetings with both Draco and Severus. Just as Hade was growing so bored he was considering killing the two gingers now. Hogsmeade weekend approached. Time to meet the twins. Hade finally escaped Granger and the Weasleys after claiming he was going to get them all something special this year. It took only 3 seconds to drop the Harry Potter glamour and apparate to Weasley wizarding wheezes. George was sitting on a stool by the counter, levitating their products and restocking the shelves, when the shop door opened. He stood and walked towards the entrance expecting to see Sumiome there dyed purple and green. The ginger was surprised to see that the pranks hadn't been set off, and only one friend of theirs had never been caught by their traps. Fred, he yelled. Harry's come for a visit. As soon as they said that, a tall, gorgeous-looking individual with vibrant green eyes stepped forward. If it wasn't for the scar and that familiar grin, George almost wouldn't have recognized their old business partner and dear friend. Hadrian grinned as George, astute as always, realized just who had visited. They sat for a few minutes waiting for Fred as George drew some tea. Finally the two boys sat in front of him, looking expectant. They had changed since they'd flown the nest. Both had bought matching high-quality suits to replace their ragged jeans and robes. Their hair, one a fierce orange like their siblings, was now a darker, fiery auburn. Independent and separate from the Weasleys, which made sense considering they were now Pruitts. Not that their parents or younger siblings were aware of this small fact. Even Percy had agreed with his brothers for once, when they all decided to renounce the name Weasley. None of them wanted to retain the taint of belonging to a family of known blood traitors. They had told Harry all of this, seeing Harry Potter as their youngest brother. They were family. It was because of this that it didn't take long for him to explain his summer, and for them to accept these changes. The Pruitts hadn't exactly been light anyway. Now the only thing Hadrian had to worry about was making it to Christmas. The holidays. Suddenly a strong vibration ran through him, and the ground in front of him glowed slightly before fading again. The wards were down. He turned quickly and, seeing no gingers in sight, apparated away. The Malfoys and company were sitting tensely in the Dark Lord's study at Riddle Manor. Now its protection on the Fidelius charm was renewed. Their lord had returned to his home. Narcissa looked at her husband, and couldn't help but frown slightly at his pale complexion, hardly noticeable against his usual alabaster skin. They were both concerned as they had plans this Christmas that clashed with Hadrian's arrival. The Lestranges would be joining them for the holiday, and they would then be attending the Death Eater's ball. Of course, no one else knew of Hades' change in alliance, including Bella. She was sure all three of them were imagining a gruesome death at Hades' hands if Bella insulted his beloved godfather. The only one that seemed completely unconcerned was their lord, but he was always unreadable. Voldemort sat at his desk waiting for the arrival of 6. Hopeful Bellatrix and the Lestrange brothers would arrive first, so he could explain that his Hadrian was not to be touched. After all, Bella was insane, and he knew Rodolphus had developed a taste for young beautiful men. And Hade was beautiful. After that, Severus would be arriving with the young Malfoy, and Hadrian in tow. What he wasn't expecting was for Severus to arrive first, with only Draco behind him. Where was his little one? Appears he is missing. I searched the castle and its grounds for hours, yet he is nowhere to be found. It's possible Dumbledore took him to the Weasleys or headquarters. His lord raised his wand, and just as Snape began to tense, preparing for the Cruciatus, several loud bangs and wild screams echoed through the manor. Saved by the torturous screams, he thought, as he relaxed. Lucius had been sitting still in his chair the entire time. Whilst at first he had befriended Hadrian for his wife's sake, he had grown rather fond of Hades' strange personality. The boy was rather witty and good company. He'd been almost as worried as Narcissa upon hearing Hadrian had been silent for a while. Even more so when Severus admitted he hadn't been eating much. But this worry was much worse. Hade could be anywhere. Dumbledore could have gotten his manipulative claws into him, and there was nothing they could do. He had been shocked out of his brooding silence at the insane tortured screams that seemed to resonate from the entrance hall. Everyone in the room stood as one, and rushed out to see what was happening. Narcissa could not believe her eyes. After she'd heard that Hade was missing, she was distraught. But in front of her was such a strange sight, she couldn't even be angry. The 5 occupants of the study stood at the stairs looking down at the strange sight. Rodolphus Lestrange was writhing on the floor, screaming in absolute agony, as the skin seemed to be peeling itself away from his body. Another person, most likely Rabaston, had been plastered to a wall by a tight curtain of thorns, small drops of blood dripping down the rosewood finishings. And there, blasting curses away at each other, was her sister and Hadrian. Hade had just arrived in the manor, carrying so many presents his arms hurt. He looked around, taking in how different the manor looked from his. Threw her head back, her wild mane flying in the heavy atmosphere of their magic as she cackled. She threw a crucio towards him, predictably. "Is that the best you've got?" He screamed and returned a somnum exteri. If that curse had hit her, she would have been a deep dream full of her worst nightmares. From the outraged look on her face, she knew it. She returned, fire with vigor, flashes of dark reds and corkscrew purples flying through. Eventually she stood again, wand poised for the kill, as its tip glowed the same green as his eyes. Her face twisted into a snarl, as Hade prepared to duck behind her husband, making her kill him instead. They could have danced for hours, if Vol and Co. hadn't shown up and blasted them apart. Hade looked up at them all and smiled sheepishly, now that he was out of the strange trance he wanted to when fighting or torturing. Well, playing with his food was more accurate. Merry Christmas? Hade had stopped walking at the top of the stairs as everyone walked in. Everyone was going to be mad at him for disappearing like that. He still wasn't used to people worrying about him. Vol stopped and turned to look at him, a single brow raised, waiting. I missed you, Hade said, face blank and slightly wary. Vol didn't say anything, and Hadrian began to wonder if he'd really messed up this time. Tom just looked at Hadrian for a second, and wasn't sure how to react. He'd missed him also, and wanted nothing more than to take him in his arms. Usually he would punish his followers for fighting with one another. But looking at Hadrian, he remembered he was looking at his ally and only equal. So, taking what he wanted, he reached out his hand, and when Hade gave him that illegal smile, pulled him into his arms and took him into the study. He most likely wouldn't be letting go all night. Wow. Just wow. I honestly never thought that this FIC would be so popular. It's coming to the end now, and I'm so excited for the next one. I hope you guys will stick with Harry. Maybe. Bellatrix sat with her husband and brother-in-law, sore after the fight with Ickle Harrykins. He was all grown up now. Little lion can roar. But what was he doing here with her lord? It made no sense. And those spells were so dark, not for small tiny children to play with. Severus the traitorous spy finished healing her, and she quickly cuddled up to her sweet little sister Chissa. Finally, her lord walked in with Potter following. She was about to ask what was going on when she saw something terrible. You filthy half-blood. You dare sit on our lord's lap? You aren't worthy to be in his presence, let alone. Narcissa had been very worried about the entire holiday, but seeing her sister scream at Hade, as his strong blank mask returned, pushed her over the edge. Bellatrix Druella Lestrange nay Black, sit down and shut your mouth. Hadrian had more of a right to stand by our lord, or sit on him, than any of us. He's powerful, intelligent, and dark. You know nothing of him, and as our lord dictates, we are to treat him as we treat our lord. He's not going anywhere, so just deal with it, Trixie. Narcissa stopped, breathing heavily and flushing from both exertion and embarrassment. She hadn't been so angry or impassioned in front of anyone since she was a child. Voldemort was silent, wondering how Bella would react to Hadrian. The Lestranges were amongst his most loyal, but he wouldn't hesitate to kill them if it kept Hade, and coincidentally his Horcrux, safe. Bellatrix was silent, clearly shocked by her sister's words, before turning slowly towards the chosen one. Everyone in the room waited with bated breath, except Hade, who seemed strangely calm. Hade laughed out loud. Not the sweet giggle Vol elicited from him. Not the husky chuckle from Draco's silly jokes or at Severus' witty comments. Not even the stiff polite huff at Lucius' sly political insults. It was more like the laugh of a dying crazy man. Or Bellatrix Lestrange. You see, Hadrian had one last secret. He knew Bella. They hadn't just fought in the ministry, atrium. Where else could he have learnt such a wonderful crucio? Of course she hadn't known just how dark he was. It would be fun playing with her. Now, Lucius exchanged quick glances with Severus. It would seem the Black Madness decided to show up in all three of the Blacks. He was lucky Draco was more of a Malfoy. Vol wasn't sure what he thought about Hadrian being so close to his insane most loyal follower. He would have to wait and see how it went. Hopefully everything would be sorted by Christmas. Christmas Day. Hadrian woke up early on Christmas, which wasn't a common occurrence. Usually he didn't have anything to look forward to. This Christmas, however, would be different. The room was cloaked in a thick, comforting darkness, almost like a warm blanket. Looking up, he greeted his father, Mortimer, Death. Hey Dad. Merry Christmas. He smiled, waiting for a reply in that familiar rasping, deep sibilant language of the dead. Hello my son. Merry tidings this Yule. I see you have made a decision. At this, Hade smiled sheepishly, blushing. Only around his parents. And now Vol, could he be so clear and open with his emotions? Yeah, I think Vol is special. I want to stay with him. Death didn't respond, silent yet clearly approving. I'm sure I will see you again, even if you do stick to this mortal realm. I love you, my son. Hadrian smiled, a sweet innocent smile. And I you. Voldemort woke to a slight chill, one he'd grown used to sleeping besides his beloved. It was Christmas, and today would be the day he made Hadrian his. Today was the day he would propose. He turned towards his lover, just as he stretched languidly and almost cat-like. Instantly Tom's eyes were glued to the stretch of tanned midriff revealed by his lifted shirt. Hade looked over at him and smirked, before rolling over gracefully and straddling the very happy Dark Lord. "Merry Christmas," Hadrian said, smiling sweetly. Vol responded with a small but sincere smile. "And to you, Mea Anam. Are you looking forward to today?" Hade turned towards Vol, straddling him to look down into those stunning wine-red eyes. They sparkled and only helped to solidify his decision to stay. Long ago his father had offered to keep and raise Hadrian in death. Hade had agreed, but only if he was murdered or killed himself. He'd been 9, and already tired of life. Now, he couldn't even consider leaving the Dark Lord beneath him. "Yeah, I can't wait to give you your present." He winked before walking away, oh so casually dropping his clothes to the floor and sashaying away into the bathroom. He pretended not to hear the possessive, husky growl that followed him through. The small, joyful smile on his wife's face, however, made it all worth it. They were meeting in the formal dining room for breakfast, if only to accommodate the massive feast his elves had laid out for them. There, Severus was only warmed by the fact that Hadrian knew them all so well. He was the first seat himself, quickly followed by the Malfoys and the Dark Lord. The 3 Lestranges only looked at him strangely before sitting themselves. The house elf reappeared and handed a tall goblet of warm dark red liquid to Hade, who had seated himself quite comfortably on his lord's lap. A sight Severus still had yet to be used to. Draco could barely contain his excitement, and all but ran to the sitting room after breakfast. Contrary to the purebloods' usual behavior, Bellatrix sat herself down next to his mother on the floor, with he and Hadrian. The other adults of the room sat themselves around the tree in various chairs. The tree stood 8 feet tall, brushing the very ceiling. It was laden with many expensive decorations and, more importantly, presents. They started with the Lestranges first. For Draco they had bought another book full of very illegal dark spells. He rolled his eyes. They got him the same thing every year. For their lord they had bought the complete history of the Travels of Slytherin, for which he nodded his head gratefully. His mother received a narcissus flower, carved from diamond and embedded with lapis lazuli. Its stem was thin and pure silver. She smiled, delighted. Lucius received a dark cape with a silver snake head clasp, which he appreciated greatly. Severus received a set of crystal vials, and they received a nod of acknowledgement in return. Next, Severus pulled out his gifts, all potions of course. For both Draco and Lucius, he had brewed a large variety of hair care products, which caused everyone in the room to laugh. The Lestranges received a vial of sanity stabilizer. Going from their glares, his gift was not best received. To Narcissa he gave a beautifully wrapped box which contained several rose-scented beauty products. Her beatific smile showed her appreciation. Hade received a large chest, confusing everyone. Inside were several large preserved decanters full of his mysterious red liquid. His eyes flickered solid black, before the centers glowed green, and he returned a grin full of long, sharp teeth. The trunk was quickly closed and locked. Only the acknowledgement of the two's relationship, and a risky move on the potion master's life. Everyone in the room waited with bated breath, which was release when the Dark Lord smirked and sent a pointed look towards his young demon lover. Sev chuckled when Hadrian only stuck his tongue out in response. The Dark Lord fell silent, before thanking them quietly. Everyone chuckled at that. It's the Narcissus star. If you put it in a dark room and send a lumos its way, it can actually project it onto the ceiling. She smiled and pulled him into a one-armed hug, staring transfixed at the starry orb. After that, he gave Lucius a cane of dark cherry wood, with a silver tip and a regal marble Pegasus as the handle. It was stunning and beautifully done, with creeping vines barely carved up the sides. Draco received a single envelope, and the disappointment on his face was amusing. Upon opening it, the disappointment morphed to elation, as he saw the voucher for Senior Imaldus tailor shop in Italy. That man's clothes were of the highest quality, and even the Malfoys would struggle to get clothes from there. Everyone looked towards Hadrian and the Dark Lord, obviously expecting some sort of extravagant gift. Hade smirked as they would all be sorely disappointed. "You will get your gift later, my lord," he hissed with a wink. The slight darkening of the man's eyes were the only response. Voldemort shifted slightly as everyone turned to him. He had of course only gotten Hadrian a gift. He was a Dark Lord after all. He cleared his throat and took Hades' hands, bringing him to stand. There were no words as he got to his knees and pulled out a dark purple velvet box. Inside lay 3 things. Slytherin's consort ring, showing that he and Hadrian were to be married. The Peveril bonding band, to show everyone they were bound in soul and magic. They already were after all, this was just formality. And finally, a beautiful circlet. All 3 items matched, silver with onyx and emeralds inlaid. The ring had the head of a snake with onyx eyes, and a small diamond captured by its fangs. The band was silver with the Peveril sigil in onyx lines, and he'd had their initials put in fine emerald veins. The circlet was a ring of silver snakes and vines intertwining with emeralds and onyx scattered through it. He looked up towards his demon, nervous even now that he would say no. He said only 2 words, "Be mine." Hadrian was shocked to say the least. He had never felt this many emotions in one go. He glanced around the room to see shock in everyone's face, and tears in Narcissa and surprisingly Bellatrix's eyes. He looked back down to the eyes that mattered. Those 2 shining rubies looked deep into his soul. This was the man that had given him a new life away from betrayal and abuse. This was the man that accepted who and what he was. Suddenly, Hade didn't know why he was even thinking about this. Thinking back to this morning, he'd know. He'd told his father he was staying with his Dark Lord. With volume he looked down at his future husband and smiled. The widest, happiest smile he had ever shown. "I already am." Finally the day was over, after hours of music, food and celebration. Voldemort walked upstairs to join his fiancée. It felt strange to say that, and the Dark Lord would never admit to anyone other than Hadrian how excited he was. As a child, this wasn't something he thought he would ever have. Hadrian had gone up to the room before Vol, wanting to surprise him. Quickly, he changed into the outfit he had bought earlier. He would not be outdone. He wore nothing but the tightest leather trousers and the 3 gifts from Volume. He just leant back on the dark silk sheets when the door swung open and a deep husky growl reverberated through the room. He smirked and looked up at Volume. "Hello, my lord. Like what you see." The Dark Lord didn't say anything, and chuckling, he rolled onto his stomach, leaning over the bed to pick up his gift from where he had hidden it. Under Vol's side of the bed, Voldemort had no words for what he saw in front of him. None. When Hade turned and leant over the bed, he stalked forwards ready to jump up and embrace him. He paused when Hadrian turned around, holding a small box and wearing his usual masks. Hade was worried about something. He quickly sat beside him and took his face in his hands. "Please Maya Anam, no masks with me. There's nothing you could do to make me hate you or judge you. There, forever." He looked up, and seeing the pure panic in his eyes, couldn't help but smile. "But this year I decided I didn't want that. I looked into it, and there is a way to tether a demon to the mortal realm." At this he opened the box and handed it to Volume. Voldemort had to take a minute to realize what it was he'd just felt. Fear. Actual fear. More than that, he'd been terrified that Hadrian would leave them all. Leave him. He hadn't been scared since he was a little boy, trying not to cry at the sound of the bombs. He took a deep breath and took the box from Hade, opening it carefully. Inside was a small blade, made from a strange material, pure black, and a very old sheet of paper with runes drawn on. "What is this?" His fiancée looked nervous for a second and was silent, before replying. "Vol, you hold in your hands the only known ritual to bind a demon to a human. And, coincidentally, the only way I can stay here. This gives you the power to summon me, control my powers and force me to shift to my full demonic form. That's the kind of power nobody should have. I'm trusting you not to abuse this power, or use it against me." Voldemort didn't know what to think. This was more than marriage, more than magical bonding. It was even more than a soul bond. This was complete control over the other. and Hadrian trusted him. Hade was silent for a while, before Vol turned to him and took his face in his hands. I am honored that you trust me with this. With you, no one could ever trust me or care for me the way you do, and I could never love anyone as I do you. I swear, I will never break this trust. He breathed a sigh of relief and quickly found his way into Tom's lap, straddling him with his arms around his neck. Hade, how did you find something like this? Vol couldn't help but be intrigued at how such a powerful and dark spell could have been created. Surely something like this would have been used before and banned. Over 1,000 years ago, a wizard was worried about the future of his house's line, so he tried to find a way to ensure their survival. He believed if he could control a demon, they would go on for generations to come. He managed it as well, except he could never summon or capture a demon to control them. My kind are rare and have lots of tricks to get out of a sticky situation. And he had no way of holding one long enough to carve the runes into them. The only way this could possibly work was if the demon was willing, which would never happen ever again. Hadrian knew Vol and loved him, which is why he didn't really trust him so much with this. He trusted the Dark Lord with his life, but nothing else. Any proof of the ritual would be destroyed once they performed it. He wouldn't allow anyone to control his father's soldiers. Speaking of fathers, I need to tell my family about the news. 1 week later, Hadrian was sitting in the corner talking quietly to Severus and Lucius about a new Muggle-born proposal, as Draco took tea with his mother. Apart from the occasional murmur, the room was silent, and the Dark Lord wondered what he had missed. Then he saw it. There, sitting on the coffee table of the family room by the Lestranges, was the Daily Prophet. It was the 3rd of January, and by now everyone would have noticed that Harry Potter had not returned to school. Or, in other words, the Dark's plan had been put into motion. Chaos and panic would ensue, and whilst the whole world wondered if their savior was dead, Harry Potter would sneak them into Hogwarts, spelling their doom. Though not quite yet. First, they would wait and enjoy the destruction that follows. Dumbledore POV. Dumbledore sat in his office, surrounded by members of the Order. They could no longer meet at Grimwald Place, as Creature had caused havoc in Harry Potter's absence. He touched his beard and hold on a lemon drop absent-mindedly, whilst smiling genially with a twinkle in his eye. On the outside, he was the perfect picture of a caring grandfather, calm and happy. Inside, however, he was furious. His plan had been meticulously laid out. The Potters dying, Harry going to the Dursleys, every confrontation with Voldemort. It would be perfect. Voldemort would fall, Potter would die a martyr, and everyone would be grateful to the great and powerful Albus Wulfric Percival Brian Dumbledore. Is that right? Did I remember it? But then Potter had to go and get himself captured. Severus reported that he had not seen the best, but he hadn't returned to the Order since then. Relax, my boys. Fretting will do us no good. Shacklebolt have a lemon drop? Instantly, they all fell quiet, and he reveled in the power he had over them. This is not a time to be calm, Albus. Have you not seen the papers? Everyone knows he is missing, and is probably dead already. At this proclamation, the Weasley matriarch and her daughter started wailing. Slight overkill, especially considering they both wanted the boy for his money. But whatever worked. Harry is not dead. If he was, Voldemort would have attacked by now, gloating. Moody interjected, and Albus was grateful for Alistair's input. Silence fell, and after a few more words they were dismissed. Now all they could do is wait. Later. 3 months. 3 months. 3 months. Hadrian hissed. He wasn't very happy, as his fiancée could tell. He'd been pacing in their room all day. Why? He had been stuck in Malfoy Manor for 3 months. Draco and Severus had returned to the school to avoid suspicion, with Lucius back at the ministry to assess the best ways to take over. The only company he had was Narcissa and Volume, who were both equally as bored, even if they didn't show it. Everyone was eager for this to end, but until Vol gave the word, they had to wait. Every day the wizarding world fell further into despair as they slowly lost hope of their savior returning. I know you are bored, my love, but this will all be worth it soon. Hade scowled at him before sitting at their desk, pouting. When? When can we kill him? I'm sick of sitting in this place with nothing to do. I want to go home. They had agreed that when the war was over, home would be Peveril Castle. Voldemort refused to associate with the Riddle name any longer, and hated and never cared for the Potter name, only its associated titles. They weren't his real parents. I'm sure you can find something to entertain yourself, Vol hissed back. Not looking up from the reports he was reading. Hadrian gained a wicked smirk, before crawling along the bed and draping his arms over his lover. Volul. Voldemort smirked as Hadrian hissed sibilant tones in his ear. He knew he would tease and torture Vol until he got what he wanted. Normally, the Dark Lord would love to play along, but annoyingly he really needed to finish these reports. Tomorrow. Instantaneously, Hadrian stopped and swung around gracefully to straddle Voldemort's lap. Huh? Chuckling, he moved his reports and wrapped his arms around Hades' slim waist. Tomorrow, Mea Anam, you will return to Hogwarts and let us in. Tomorrow it ends. The next day, Hadrian looked around, surveying the chaos of Lucius Malfoy's study. Severus and Draco were crammed in the flue listening as the Dark Lord barked out orders to them. Lucius sat at his desk, hair misplaced, as he went over plans for the ministry at the same time. The Lestranges weren't evening listening, simply preparing themselves to cause the light as much chaos as possible. Narcissa sat by the flue, weeping tearfully over his oncoming departure. It was quite uncomfortable, really. He was lost in his own plans, the ones the others knew nothing of. Now was time for his revenge. The perfect time to strike the fools that truly believed he was on their side. Hadrian. He looked up to see the room had gone silent. It was time to go. He walked up to Narcissa, kissing her on the cheek before being pulled into a long strangling hug. Even Luke gave him a stiff, one-armed embrace before walking away with the Lestranges, giving him and his fiancée some privacy. They stood for a while not saying anything. They both thought the same thing, and no words could encompass that. They kissed, both knowing this may well be the last time they saw each other. With a final, sad smile, Hade turned away and vanished into the shadows. Voldemort stood for a while after his soul had left. Morose. His illegal sunshine was gone. Now all he could do was work against Dumbledore and bring Hade back. At Hogwarts, Hadrian stood at the hill, looking up at the beautiful old castle. That's magic had welcomed him with open arms. His first home. He shook his head, clearing his thoughts before walking up towards the school, trying not to smile at the thought of everyone's faces. It would all be over soon, and he would be free to be exactly who and what he truly was. Dumbledore would pay for taking that from him, even if it wasn't part of Vol's plan. Dumbledore's soul would be his. Hermione Granger was the brightest witch of her age, as everyone knew, so of course she was the first person to notice the messy-haired boy walking towards them. Harry, where have you been? She ran towards him and threw her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. The boy would save them all, and then she would get the reward she deserved for all the danger he'd brought her into. Hermione Granger, Minister for Magic. Ron Weasley blinked, confused. Wasn't Harry supposed to be kidnapped? He must have escaped and was here to rescue them. Nice one, mate. It's great to see you again. How'd you escape? Everything would be fine again, and Ron Weasley would step out of his brother's shadows. Ron Weasley, best chaser ever. Hadrian struggled not to laugh at their simple-minded thoughts. As if this would go their way. Best to play his part. Their shock, betrayal, and pain would be enough to feed him for a month. I've missed you guys so much. The Death Eaters found me, but I managed to get away. I'm so sorry, but I had to hide out for a while. I couldn't risk them finding any of you. They already killed my relatives. He was silent for a minute as if Severus sat in his usual seat at the head table, surveying the great hall with his usual cool stare and slightly disgusted sneer. Inside, his stomach was in knots, as the Muggles said. Today would be the day he could finally quit teaching and retire. Today was the day the war would finally be over. A loud bang brought his attention as the original Golden Trio walked in, Hadrian included. He turned towards the headmaster, and seeing the twinkle return to the old man's eyes filled him with evil glee. He couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized that the dark demon's return spelt their doom. Dumbledore stood instantly, filled with evil glee. Harry had escaped, and his plans could once again run smoothly. He would speak to the boy and send him out with his spies right away to destroy the Horcruxes. Of course Albus would join them, but he would be dead, acting as the final incentive for the Potter boy to destroy Voldemort, where he would sadly die, and Dumbledore would return to mourn their lost savior. Everything was going according to plan. Hadrian walked in, and the chic on everyone's faces was delicious to see. And he was sure he and Draco were the only ones to spot the dark delight on Severus' face. Harry! Oh Merlin, he'd forgot about the ginger whore. He refused to let her touch him. It wouldn't happen. Luckily for him, Dumbledore was already walking towards him, indicating for him to follow. Time for Harry Potter to come back for a bit. He looked around and grinned sheepishly, running his hand through his hair. Instantly everyone started cheering, and in the noise a pattern started to become apparent. Harry, you're back. It's Potter. Potter's back. It's going to be okay. He'll save us. Can you do it, Harry? Can you really kill him? It was difficult not to laugh in their faces and release the spells hiding his demon form. He could feast on them all and sacrifice their souls to his father. That darkest part of him was desperate for release, but he held tight. Not yet. Soon. He looked up when everyone fell silent to see the reason why. Every single Slytherin was staring at him, and, one by one, began clapping slowly. To everyone else it would seem sarcastic and cruel. A message from the dark. To him, he knew. It was a message from Draco. The Slytherins knew and were ready. They would stay in the dungeons as he let the Death Eaters in. A few minutes later, everyone was gathered in the office, the Weasleys, Granger, and all the order. Now everyone, be patient. I'm sure Harry has had a very trying time in the clutches of Voldemort. Give him space. The room fell silent and they turned to look at Harry Potter, their savior. Harry, my boy, what happened? Everyone was shocked as tears welled in his eyes. Harry twisted his hands in his lap, eyes downcast as he took several deep breaths. My aunt had sent me out to get shopping. I wasn't gone that long, but when I got back, Death Eaters were there. I don't understand how they could have gotten through the wards. I saw them apparate away with my relatives, so I knew I had to leave before they saw me. I ran back to the shop. I knew they wouldn't follow me to a Muggle area. Then I got the night bus in a back alley and hid in a Muggle hotel. I've been getting buses and staying in hotels trying to get back here without being caught. I was almost spotted several times, but eventually I got here. Everyone was silent, taking in what he had just said. Ginny leant forward to wrap her arms around her boyfriend, but he shrunk down, obviously scarred by what had happened. They're dead, aren't they? Nobody answered, and that was all the answer needed. Perhaps, my boy, it is time for bed. You clearly need rest. The children nodded and left the adults looking worried and pensive in the office, all of them wondering the same thing. What was you-know-who up to? Hadrian smirked as he lay in bed, waiting for the others to fall asleep. Listening, he heard the light breathing of Dean and snuffles from Seamus under the loud snores of Ronald. It was time. He hopped up, not surprised to see Neville looking at him. Is it time, Hade? He nodded and they walked downstairs, even less surprised to see the twins and Luna. How the twins had gotten in they didn't want to know. Go to the Slytherin common room. I'm sure George or Fred know where it is. Draco will let you in. He watched them look at each other before nodding and leaving without a word. He was glad his friends understood the gravity of the situation. He took his time walking to the room of requirement. No one suspected anything. He walked past the tapestry 3 times thinking one thing. Wardroom. A door appeared and he drew near, strangely calm considering what was happening. By doing this, he was turning his back from a life with the gods. He was binding himself to this earth, even whilst risking that Vol would never forgive him for what he was about to do. He would let the Death Eaters in. He would let the dark win this war. But he wouldn't let them take Dumbledore. The man belonged to him. Inside the room, it was empty, cold and dark. In the center was a podium with a beautiful glowing crystal placed on top. He walked forwards with no resistance. The castle clearly agreed with his decision. Placing a hand on the crystal, he released the full extent of his magic to probe the intricate webs and weaves that made up the ancient powerful wards. He moved along until he felt the presence of the Whomping Willow, and underneath it, the Death Eaters. He concentrated. This part would be the most difficult. He couldn't collapse the wards. Not only would the castle never allow it, but the magical backlash would alert everyone in the castle. He took each thread of magic, twisting them until they reformed around the dark wizards. Done. He collapsed back, tired but pleased. His job wasn't over yet. The original plan had been to rush in straight away with the Weasleys and Granger, having a vision, but instead he walked towards the office on his own. Dumbledore was his. Voldemort smirked the second he felt the wards twist around his followers. They were in. He stood tall, looking towards Lucius. Today is the day the light fall, and the dark rises. Forwards. He turned back, and gestured to the Lestranges to go forwards. The Dees would wait outside the castle, whilst the Lestranges, the Carrows and Fenrir went inside to sow chaos. Walking forwards, the castle peak of emotion into sight. He was returning home and to his love. It was glorious. Minerva McGonagall had been through much in her time. After teaching the Marauders and the Golden Trio, she believed she was prepared for anything. Yet still, she was shocked to see two gingers and a brunette standing in her office bellowing about Death Eaters. What on earth is? Death Eaters are in the castle. Everyone's left their common rooms to fight back, but Minerva felt like she was having a heart attack, but walked towards the window as Hermione had gestured. There she almost passed out. Thousands and thousands of figures in dark masks stood outside waiting. How had no one known? Someone must have let them in. The three children gasped, and Minnie remembered he duty to the school. You three gather all the first and second years and make sure they are in the common rooms. With that she walked away towards the entrance of the school, bumping into Phileas on the way. Death Eaters. Nothing else needed to be said, and they walked to the doors where she raised her wand. Minerva, what are you going to do? No one can find Albus or any of the Slytherins, and the Death Eaters are already here. She shook her head and sighed. The least we can do is hit back at them, Phileas. Higher totem, locomotor. Chills rose on the back of students' necks, as the large statues that had always been there stood from their crouched positions and attacked the Death Eaters. The dark wizards returned fire, and the battle had begun. Draco slipped back into the common room, a worried, pensive look on his face. Draco, what going on out there? Blaise asked. Draco sighed and sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. Uncle Sev didn't know much, but he said that after Hadrian let our side in, he and Dumbledore haven't been seen. Everyone knows about the attack now, though. The battle's begun. We're to stay in here until our parents come and get us. Everyone sighed and rolled their eyes at that, bored, worried, and desperately wanting to help. The three Gryffindors and the blonde Ravenclaw walked forwards. The don't know where Hade is? The ginger twins asked. Draco shook his head. He understood how the four felt. Hadrian was distant and cold at times, and a little scary, but he was their friend, and now they didn't know where he was. What if Dumbledore had figured them out and was fighting Hade? The blonde Ravenclaw said Hade is just fine. He has his own destiny to fulfill. Fate decided to give him a parting gift. The common room fell silent, confused. What the hell did that mean? Longbottom shook his head, chuckling slightly. Never try to understand Luna. Just accept that she knows what she's talking about. If she says Snake is safe, then he is. Hadrian could hear the beginning of the battle downstairs as he walked in to Dumbledore's office. The old man stood there looking out the window, a stricken look on his face. Headmaster. Dumbledore turned around with surprising speed. Harry, did you have a vision, my boy? Did you know this was going to happen? Dumbledore couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't the plan. They hadn't found a single Horcrux. Headmaster. Dumbledore spun around and was relieved to see Potter there. Harry, did you have a vision, my boy? Did you know this was going to happen? That must be the explanation of why he was here and not fighting like a good little Gryffindor. What it didn't explain was how the Death Eaters got in. The Malfoy heir must have let them in. I'm afraid so, Headmaster. Albus didn't understand. I'm sorry, my boy? Harry Potter chuckled and took off his glasses, just holding them. You should be sorry, Headmaster. You should be sorry for everything. This is all your fault after all. But of course you wouldn't understand. You never did. Hadrian was hoping to keep up the charade a little longer. But what the hell? He wasn't even supposed to be here. He was supposed to be downstairs, fighting the dark. You see, Dumbledore, I'm the one that let them in. Hade had been right. The shock and betrayal was delicious. Soon it would be joined by fear. Harry, my boy, why? How could you betray us like this? Hadrian glared and dropped his glamour, revealing his true face, nothing like James Potter. Black eyes with glowing green iris and black marking on his face. Silky black hair, blood red in the candlelight. Hadrian Peverell, not Harry Potter. Betray you? That would imply I was on your side to begin with. I have always hated you, leaving me with filthy muggles to abuse and death, forcing me to fight your battles again and again. I have always been dark, and I have been waiting for this. Dumbledore stumbled back in terror. Where had his plan gone so wrong? He couldn't die, he was the great Albus Dumbledore. Waiting for, what? The monster before him smirked and shifted again. Now he didn't. Wind blew out the lights. The demonic creature in front of him grinned, and he whimpered as terror took him in its cold grip. What are you? He whispered. It lumbered forward slowly, and took him by the neck, lifting him into the air. Am your death. At that it dragged him forwards, opening its jaws wide, before drawing him into oblivion. Vol stood opposite the light side. They had won by now, all their enemies too injured to fight anymore. However, they were missing something. Hadrian was nowhere to be seen, and neither was Dumbledore. He worried that the old fool had dared hurt his fiancée, but the small blonde child that stood at his side had assured them all that he would be along soon. He didn't understand why anyone believed her, but all he could do now was wait. Hermione stood by Ron and Ginny, worried and furious. Harry Potter was missing again, and Luna, Neville, Fred and George had joined the dark. Ron hadn't stopped swearing, and for once she didn't reprimand him. His brothers had betrayed them and Greyback had bitten off his leg. Why hadn't Harry killed you-know-who yet? Suddenly a screech brought her out of her thoughts. Harry! Ginny had spotted him crawling over some rubble, drenched in blood. His hair covered his face and he seemed to be missing his glasses. Oh God, what happened? She whispered to Ron and Ginny. Hadrian walked towards the middle of the two sides, not quite done playing with the light yet. Harry, where's Dumbledore? Hermione shouted at him. He looked over at Vol, who clearly wanted to know as well. He stood tall and looked directly at his fiancée. Dumbledore is dead. He heard several shocked gasps and distraught cries from behind him, but focused on Volume, who looked furious. Perhaps toying with the wizard's linger wasn't a good idea. He looked straight up at the light side and declared, I killed him. With that he opened the bag he carried and threw its contents at Granger and the Weasleys, before walking over to Voldemort. He placed his hand on his chest, not noticing the blood he got on Vol's robes. I'm sorry. I had to. Hermione looked down at the bag's contents in unison with the Weasleys, and screamed. Screams, cries and yells echoed around the rubble of statues and conjured shields, as everyone caught sight of Dumbledore's gruesome, decapitated head. She looked up and glared hatefully at Harry. How could you? He simply laughed and she finally saw his face. This wasn't Harry Potter. Did Harry even exist? I've never been on your side. As if ordered, all the Death Eaters rushed forwards, and the light knew they had lost. They'd lost everything. 3 days later, Hadrian sat in the Malfoy study in front of the Malfoys, Severus and Volume. He hadn't seen any of them since the battle. Severus had been busy brewing.
Vol was furious.
Completely furious. He had trusted Hadrian, and the demon had gone behind his back and took what was his right. He was going to kill Dumbledore. And even worse, the demonic binding ritual had disappeared. Had Hade changed his mind? Was he turning on them? He knew the others all had the same concerns. Explain, Hadrian. I'd like to know just what was going through your mind when you ate our greatest enemy. Are you not staying with us anymore? Do you no longer wish to be part of our family? Hadrian shocked himself and everyone else when tears spilt from his eyes. He hadn't cried since he was 7 years old. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Narcissa launched herself forwards, holding him close to her. He took comfort that at least she didn't hate him. The ritual that allows my kind to remain here, I didn't just find it. Fate told me about it. There are 3 conditions that must be met. Sacrifice of the soul, a blood sacrifice, and acceptance of the bond. Sacrifice of the soul has been done several times over. I've killed plenty of people and passed their souls over to my father's service. The blood sacrifice had to be meaningful. Either someone I loved or hated. Dumbledore was the perfect choice. Severus surprised himself with how terrible he felt at seeing those glowing green eyes spill over with tears. He reached over, placing a comforting hand on Hades' shoulder. We understand, Hadrian, and we all still love you. I think our Lord just wants to know why you couldn't have told us. You didn't need to go behind our backs like this. Decision. Vol could hardly believe what he was feeling, but was glad that Hadrian hadn't simply betrayed him. Who were the 3, and how do we finish the ritual? Hade was surprised that Vol still wanted to complete the ritual. But looking at the love in his ruby-red eyes, he was ecstatic. Perhaps he could stay. The 3 are the demon, the master, and the witness. You, me, and one of the others. All you need to do is state that you accept the bond. Narcissa jumped up and clapped her hands, squealing. Wonderful. We can do all 3 bonds at the wedding. Marriage, soul, and demonic. Everyone laughed at that, and she smiled as Hadrian curled up in her lord's lap. The war was over. Perhaps now they could all move on with their lives. That's it. It's finished. I really hope you guys liked this FIC, and I'll be posting the top voted ideas for my next FIC soon. Until then, this is goodbye. Mischief managed.